CD 7. Chapter 27. Rhoda, 2022. The interview with the newspaper went well. It was made up of the standard sort of questions Rhoda was usually asked about the conservation of the buildings, and in particular, stained glass windows. She always made sure the museum was credited properly, as it was good publicity, and she knew her boss would appreciate it. For the most part, Rhoda tried to stay out of the limelight and declined having her photo taken. "The interest is in the window, not me," she insisted. Her afternoon meeting with Vince Taylor, the local historian, was rather less formal and less intense. Fortunately, Nate had just got back from school with Isaac and had met the historian down at the house before bringing him up to the chapel. "Thank you for seeing me," said Vince enthusiastically, resting his weight on his walking stick. "It's a bit of a trek up here, though. I wasn't expecting that." "I did offer to bring Mr. Taylor up on the quad," said Nate. "The exercise is good for me," smiled Mr. Taylor. "And please, call me Vince." "Well, you're here in one piece, that's the main thing," said Rhoda with a smile. She liked talking to historians. They were often most enthusiastic and had a wealth of knowledge themselves. They spent a good 20 minutes talking about the window and how it was going to be restored. The process Rhoda would undertake to remove it, repair it, and restore it. "The 3 R's of conservation," she said. At that point, Nate had to take a phone call and went out of the chapel. "Are you interested in history?" Vince asked Isaac, who had been following them around the chapel as Rhoda explained her work. "Some of it. We're doing a project on the Victorians at school. Victorians. "Good spelling," said Vince. "And a good era, too. Lots of things happened in Victorian times. The Industrial Revolution changed so much. You know, the viaduct at Telverton was built in Victorian times." "Have you always lived in the area?" asked Rhoda. "Yes. Bristol born and bred. How about you? You haven't got a Somerset accent." "Neither have you," replied Rhoda. "I spent a lot of my time in Oxford teaching. I lost the local burr somewhere along the line. Where did you say you were from? West Sussex, is it? Where the museum is?" "I moved around a bit, but essentially I'm from West Sussex," said Rhoda. "Rhoda lives by the seaside," said Isaac. "Elmer Sands." "Don't worry," Rhoda said. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds. It's just home." "Doesn't matter where it is," said Vince. "If it feels like home, then it's home. Especially if you've got family connections. Family is very important, don't you think?" "Rhoda has a brother who is missing," said Isaac. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," said Vince. "It's okay." Rhoda wasn't cross that Isaac had mentioned Dean, but if she was honest, she didn't want her personal life discussed with a stranger. "Anyway, is there anything else you wanted to know about the window?" "No, I won't take up any more of your precious time," replied Vince. "I've got enough to be getting on with." "If you need any more info, just give me a call. Here's my business card. The number on the card is the museum. You can leave a message there." She passed him one of the cards she kept in her work bag. "Do you have the address for your website? The museum would love to be able to mention the write-up." Vince flipped over a fresh sheet of paper in his notebook and jotted down the web address. He ripped the page out and handed it to Rhoda. "There you go. I'll let you know when it's up." "Sorry about that," said Nate, coming back into the chapel. "It was rather more complex than I expected." "I'm just on my way now," said Vince. "Miss Sullivan has been most helpful." He turned to Rhoda. "Thank you, my dear, and I hope one day your brother gets in touch." "Me too," said Rhoda, folding the sheet of paper over and slipping it into her bag. They said their goodbyes, and Nate, together with Isaac, accompanied Vince down the hill, leaving Rhoda on her own in the chapel. It was nice talking to people about her work, but she was aware she was a bit behind schedule now. Not that Jack would mind. He'd be happy if it took her all year. But she knew there'd be penalties, and she didn't want to give the developers the slightest chance to reduce their price. Putting on her music, Rhoda had a quick look at Vince's website. It was just a landing page with basic information about the Historical Society, a photograph of Vince and an elderly woman standing in front of the Tower of Pisa, and another of him standing underneath a Victorian-looking viaduct. If anything, it looked like it was either a work in progress or a rather neglected site. Aware she was wasting even more time, Rhoda got to work and was soon immersed in recording all the glass pieces on the paper. She didn't hear the door to the chapel open, and when Nate tapped her on the shoulder, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Sorry," said Nate. Isaac appeared alongside his father. "It's okay. I was in a world of my own," said Rhoda, switching off the music. She looked at her watch. "Oh, goodness. I didn't realize it was as late as that." "We were just coming up to see if you wanted to come out for a pizza," said Nate. "Dad's over at Aggie's, and I don't fancy cooking." "That's really kind, but I couldn't intrude." Nate rolled his eyes. "Not that again. Come on, come for a pizza. There's nothing in the fridge, I checked. You'll be starving." "Please come," said Isaac. "I like margarita, stuffed crust with chicken. Margherita, a common pizza made with tomatoes, cheese, basil, salt, and olive oil." Normally, Rhoda would have stuck to her guns. But how could she refuse Isaac? He wouldn't understand, and she didn't want him to feel she'd rejected him. Besides, what was wrong with sharing a pizza with the Hartwells? "Okay, I'll come. Don't want to starve." "What's this?" asked Isaac, looking at Rhoda's laptop, which she'd left on the side. "Hey, you shouldn't be looking at other people's things," reprimanded Nate. And then to Rhoda, "Sorry." "Oh, it's okay." She went over to where Isaac was standing. "That's just the website of the guy who came to look at the window earlier. Vince Taylor, the historian." "How did it go?" asked Nate. "I missed most of it while I was on the phone." "Seemed a nice enough bloke. He's going to put a write-up on his blog." Isaac had wandered off now, so Rhoda closed her laptop. "Right, let's get that pizza." Pizza turned out to be a great idea, and Rhoda enjoyed the company. Isaac spent most of the time quizzing Rhoda about living by the beach, and was fascinated to find out she went swimming every day in the sea. "Do you want some ice cream?" asked Nate, interrupting Isaac's interrogation about what seaweed was like to eat, and if it made her feel sick when she swallowed seawater. "I'm sorry about all the questions," said Nate, when Isaac was at the ice cream machine. "It's fine," said Rhoda, taking a sip of her water. "It's nice he's interested. I like that he asks questions. Kids should always be asking how, when, why, what." "I appreciate your patience with him. Not everyone is comfortable talking to him." "He's got character. I like that a lot. He'll be okay. You shouldn't worry about him so much." "Is it that obvious?" "Just a bit." She smiled. "Which is perfectly okay. It's also obvious you love him very much." "I do. He's a good kid." "Sorry, that's my phone vibrating," said Rhoda, as her phone buzzed on the table from where she'd been showing Isaac some pictures of the sea. "Oh, it's Shani. I'd better take this." "Sure, I'll pay the bill and meet you outside," said Nate, signalling to the waiter. Rhoda answered the call as she headed out of the door of the restaurant. "Hi, Shani. You okay?" "I'm so sorry to bother you," said Shani. "I went around to your flat this evening to water the plants, like you asked, and the front door was wide open." "What? How did that happen? Had you left it open by mistake?" It would be most unlike Shani to forget to close Rhoda's front door, but that must be the logical explanation. "I definitely locked it. I always double-check," replied Shani. "It looks like there was a break-in." "Oh no. Is it bad?" Rhoda's stomach churned at the thought of someone in her flat, her home, her sanctuary, that was all hers and no one else's. No, it all looked tidy. It was only because I noticed your desk drawer wasn't closed properly that I realised someone had been in, and the door to your bedroom was open. I called the police as soon as I realised and didn't go in. What did the police say? They came out eventually, asked me if anything was missing, gave me a crime reference number, and that was that. Have they been all through the flat? Nate came out of the restaurant and must have registered the distress on her face. He gave a slight nod as he mouthed, "You okay?" at her. Rhoda moved the phone away from her mouth. "My flat's been broken into," she whispered, before going back to what Shani was saying as Nate muttered an expletive. "I'm assuming they did," said Shani. "It wasn't ransacked, as I say. It was only a couple of things that caught my attention. It was more like a methodical search, as if they had time because they knew they wouldn't be disturbed." "Someone who knew I was away," said Rhoda. "Not an opportunist, but a premeditated break-in." "I'm really sorry, sweetheart," said Shani. "I've had the lock changed for you and the door frame fixed. They used a crowbar by the looks of it." "Bastards," said Rhoda. "Thank you for doing what you did. Let me know how much I owe you. Do the police want to speak to me?" "Don't worry about the money. And no, I don't think they do. I'm sorry, it's like a formality. I've asked around in the road, but no one saw anything or anyone." "Okay. Thanks, Shani. I do appreciate all that." They said their goodbyes, and Rhoda ended the call. She turned to Nate. "Some horrible person," she corrected herself, remembering Isaac was there. "Some horrible person has been in my flat. Nothing taken from what Shani can see, and only a drawer and a door left open." She felt the anger burn in her stomach, rising through her chest. Tears stung her eyes. I feel so exposed. I feel dirty, even though I'm not even there. Bastards. Hey, come here." Nate put his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened and resisted the sympathy for a moment, but he put his other arm around her, and she allowed herself to relax and soak up the comfort. "Bastard," said Isaac, breaking the silence as he looked at his phone. "BASTARD, an unpleasant or despicable person, or a person born whose parents were not married when he or she was born." "Hey, enough of that," said Nate. "Sorry, that's my fault," said Rhoda, grimacing at Nate, but she was relieved to see he was trying to hide a smile. "Do you need to go back to your flat?" he said. "I can come with you." "You don't have to do that." Rhoda wiped at the tears on her face. "I know. I can manage on my own." "I know that too." She looked up at him. "You know a lot?" "I know." He grinned at her. "Come on, don't be so independent all your life. A bit of moral support never did any harm." He was right, and she knew she was being churlish. "I'm not very good at accepting help." She held up her hand. "And don't say you know." "I'll make this easy for you," said Nate. "I'll drop Isaac at school in the morning, and then I'll drive you back to Sussex. We'll leave at 9, so we'll miss the worst of the traffic. You can put your mind at rest and check the flat over while I busy myself in the car with my laptop and some work files. Then we grab some lunch and drive back. How does that sound?" "Tempting." "Right, that's good enough. It's a deal." He held out his hand. Rhoda shook solemnly on the deal. "Thank you." It felt strange to be accepting help, but at the same time, she knew it came from a genuine place, and she very much appreciated it. She also appreciated that Nate had made a point of saying he'd stay in the car, so she didn't feel he was intruding on her personal space. Not that it felt very personal or private now someone had broken in, but all the same, Nate's thoughtfulness and care touched her. The drive to Sussex was stress-free, and by late morning, they were pulling up outside Rhoda's flat. "Shani lives a bit further down the road," said Rhoda. "I'll call into hers to get the key. Are you all right here? There is a cafe back in the village if you want somewhere a bit more comfortable." "I'm good here," said Nate. "Just shout if you need me." Shani gave Rhoda a big hug when she opened the door. Oh, bless you for coming back, she said. Do you want a cup of tea first? You must be tired from all that driving. I didn't come on my own, Rhoda admitted. Nate Hartwell drove me. She laughed at the eyebrow raise her friend gave her. He's just being kind, that's all. Yes, sounds like it. Well, here's the key. Let me know if you need anything. Oh, and take this too. She pressed something small and hard, wrapped in tissue, into Rhoda's hand. It's a crystal, a healing one. Leave it in the flat and it will cleanse the place for you. I bought it this morning. I was going to put it in there before you came, but you beat me to it. Ah, thanks, Shani. That's really kind. Rhoda walked back to her flat with the stone in her pocket. She didn't believe in crystals and things like that, but Shani did, and there was no reason or need to be disrespectful to her friend's beliefs. It was a nice thought, even if Rhoda didn't believe a polished pink stone was anything more than a polished pink stone. She waved the key at Nate, who gave her the thumbs-up sign from the driver's seat. Rhoda nipped up the steps to the front door of her apartment. Up here, she could see the sea and smell the salty air. She took a deep breath, realizing how much she'd missed her home ground. Just breathing in the air and letting the breeze ruffle wisps of hair and tickle the back of her neck made her feel 1,000,000 times better. She took a moment to steel herself before unlocking the door. The new doorframe would need painting to match the rest of the woodwork, and she made a mental note to pick up some paint when she could. Rhoda pushed open the front door, hesitating before going in. She looked back at the car, where Nate was watching her. He gave her a nod of encouragement. Rhoda's hand found the crystal Shani had given her, and for all her skepticism, she squeezed it tightly as she stepped across the threshold. Her flat looked exactly how she'd left it. If it wasn't for the new doorframe, she might not even have realized someone had been in the flat. And that was the bit that didn't make sense. She walked down the hallway, passing the bathroom and kitchen on her left, which looked out onto the road, and her bedroom on the right, which was the beach side. The living room stretched across the width of the flat at the end of the hallway. Rhoda went over to her desk, checking the first drawer. Everything was as she'd expected to find it, the same for the second drawer. When she opened the bottom drawer, it was then she saw the folder, where she kept everything to do with Dean's disappearance, was the wrong way up. She pulled the file out and went through the contents. There wasn't anything missing, as far as she could tell, and it all appeared to be in the order she kept it. Nothing looked out of place. She put the file back. Rhoda closed the drawer and looked around the room. Everything was as it should be. She went back down the hall to the bedroom. Her door was closed, as she liked it to be, an old habit from her days in care, when privacy was at a premium, and a closed door was both a physical and emotional boundary, not to be crossed unless invited. Shani had said her bedroom door was open, so whoever had broken in must have gone into her room. It felt even more intrusive to think someone had been in her bedroom. Her jewellery box, with its meagre offerings, was sitting in the middle of her dressing table. A quick look inside told her nothing was missing. Perhaps the intruder was an expert in jewels and could tell at a glance that everything in there were fake gems. She checked the drawer and her chest of drawers before taking a final look at her bedside table. In the cupboard, she kept a box which had things like her passport, NI details, her birth certificate, and a couple of letters Dean had written to her before they had phones and could text each other. She didn't look in this box often. It was also where she kept her papers from her time in care. Rhoda picked up one of Dean's letters from the top of the pile and eased it from the envelope. "Hi, Rhodes. You okay? They said you were back in St. Wilfrid's. I was hoping you wouldn't go back to that home. I take it the foster place didn't work out well. Hope you're all right. If you give me the number, I can ring from a payphone. Did they tell you I'm in Wales? It's a home for the naughty boys. Fucking hate it here."
We'll tell you all about it when I speak to you, because you know they read our letters. Yes, you carers. I'm talking about you lot who are reading this now.
Rhoda pressed her lips together. Dean had always hated being in Wales. She remembered him phoning her and saying it was only because he was one of the older lads that he got left alone. He'd had a fight with one of them and knocked 7 bales of shit out of him. The kid had left Dean alone after that. Dean had said you had to pretend to be a nutter. That made you unpredictable, and the others scared of you. It was the only way to survive. She returned to the letter.
I'm getting out of here the day we're 18, and I'm going to come and get you. We'll be okay. Me and you. Fuck the rest of them. Let me know your phone number and I'll ring you. Love, Dino.
Rhoda tucked the letter back in its envelope and returned it to the drawer. He hadn't come for her. Whatever had happened that drove him to run away a few weeks before their 18th birthday, she didn't know. She put the box away and left the flat, double-checking it was locked.
You okay?
Asked Nate as she climbed into his car. Yeah. She couldn't look at him, could barely speak, because she knew she was on the brink of tears. From her peripheral vision, she could see Nate turn to face her in the car. God, he was going to talk to her. He knew she wasn't okay. She grabbed at the door handle and jumped out of the car. Breaking into a run, she headed down the footpath. She could hear Nate calling her, but she ran faster, hitting the stony beach a few seconds later. Her feet sank and buckled over the pebbles, but she carried on, charging towards the sea, her vision blinded by the tears. The stones tumbled after her, and she raced down the pebble embankment before reaching the sand and then the sea. A hand grabbed her shoulder.
Rhoda, stop! Stop!
Her legs suddenly felt weak, all energy zapped from them. She stopped running and turned to Nate. The water was lapping at their shins. Their trousers were soaked. He didn't come back for me, she sobbed. He promised me he would, but he left me. He's left me in a living hell. He should never have said he'd come back. I hate him for leaving me. She threw her head back and screamed at the clouds above her. All the pain and anguish came pouring from her. Thoughts she'd kept pent up in her mind, sharing them with no one, the anger, the hurt, the despair, came rushing out, unable to be held back.
Hey, it's okay.
Nate held onto her hands. Rhoda's legs finally gave way as a wave broke against her. She sank to her knees, pulling away from Nate and burying her face in her hands. All she could do was sob. At some point, Nate helped her to her feet and, supporting her, took her back up the beach and to the door of her flat.
You'd better get some dry clothes on, he said.
Oh, God, I'm sorry, said Rhoda. I'm so embarrassed. What on earth had happened to her? She'd had some sort of mini breakdown, and the things she'd said, make that screamed, about Dean. She could barely believe it.
No need to apologise. Go on, get yourself sorted.
Rhoda took the key from her pocket as Nate started back down the steps.
Nate, don't go.
She swallowed as he halted on the second step.
You're soaking wet too.
He gave a shrug.
It's only water. It will dry.
That's not what you just said to me. She pushed the key in the lock. Come inside. I haven't got any clothes you can borrow. She gave a half-hearted smile at her attempted humour. But I've got a tumble dryer. 20 minutes later, Rhoda had showered and was dressed in dry clothes. Nate, on the other hand, was sitting on her sofa with a towel wrapped at his waist, while his jeans whirled around in the dryer. Rhoda put a cup down on the coffee table. Black coffee, I'm afraid. No milk. She sat down next to him. I am sorry for that outburst. Please stop saying sorry. He shifted position slightly to face her. Reaching out with his hand, he gave her shoulder a gentle rub.
Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?
Not really,
but I think you deserve an explanation. Only if you want to. His hand was still on her shoulder. Comfort and reassurance oozed from just his touch. She tipped her head and briefly rested her face against his fingertips. I'm angry with Dean. She took a moment. She'd actually said the words out loud to someone else. I'm angry he disappeared and never thought to let me know he was all right or what he was doing, what he had planned. Even if something has happened to him since then, I just feel I'll never know. And not knowing is the hardest thing. Her voice was soft, but she could feel the injustice stirring within her again. I've spent all my adult life not knowing. I've been saddled with this void, this emptiness, this black hole in my life that just grows and grows. It's consuming. I want it to end. Her voice wavered. I just want it to be over. Nate's hand moved slowly up and down her shoulder. Do you think there's any way you could just accept that you'll never know? Or compartmentalize it so you can move on with your life? I don't know. It was an honest answer. I've thought about it, but I feel disloyal leaving him behind. Maybe not leaving him behind then. Take him with you, but not as a burden, not as this all-consuming riddle that you can't make sense of. Have you thought about speaking to other families? I don't mean to try to find Dean, but to try to find ways to cope. I don't know. She looked away from Nate. She knew he was challenging her thought process, asking her to look at it in a different way, but she didn't know if she could. You won't be abandoning him or anything. It's not being disloyal, but you've done everything possible and you can't punish yourself forever. There was no accusation in his tone, just concern. And trying to identify the bloke in the chapel isn't the answer either. I know that. But if I can save another family from this living hell, then at least I will feel as if I've done something. Like atonement. Rhoda considered this before answering. She met Nate's gaze. Yeah, exactly that. You don't need to atone for anything, said Nate gently. None of what's happened to you as a child, as a teenager, and as an adult is your fault. You didn't have control over your past, but you do have control over your future. You just need to draw that line and then step across. As easy as that. I didn't say it would be easy. He stroked her hair. Just start by imagining the line, like you've drawn it in the sand. You can practice stepping across, just in your mind. Then when you're ready, you can do it in real life. That sounds like some psychobabble a social worker would say. It worked for me. Rhoda sat up a little straighter. It did. When they told me about Isaac, I found it hard to accept. I didn't understand. I blamed myself, I blamed Siobhan, I even blamed the school. He rubbed his chin with his other hand. To my shame, I even thought it was Isaac's fault. Oh, Nate. It's okay. Don't feel sorry for me. I was a dick. I know that now. But it took me a while to accept I couldn't change anything. I couldn't change Isaac. And why would I want to change my son? He's unique. He's special. He's Isaac. And I really wouldn't have him any other way. I accepted him for who he is. I drew that line. I crossed it. And I have never looked back. Thank you for being so understanding, said Rhoda. It means a lot. It means a lot that you let me. Nate leaned over and dropped a kiss on top of her head. I know it's not easy for you to take advice. The small kiss from Nate felt as intimate as if he'd kissed her soul. How could one simple gesture of kindness make her feel so exposed? Not in the way she'd felt about her flat being broken into, but she'd told Nate things she'd never voiced out loud, things she'd kept buried. She'd shown her raw emotions, her true emotions. It should have frightened her, but somehow it made her feel safe. They returned to Telton Hall later that day, and Rhoda was disappointed when Nate left to go home. I'll give you a call tomorrow, he promised. This time, he kissed her cheek when he left. The tingle of his lips against her skin stayed with her for a long time afterwards.
Rhoda lay awake for what felt like hours when she went to bed. She thought about what Nate had said about drawing a line in the sand. He'd made it sound so simple. Could it be as easy as that? She wasn't sure. She closed her eyes and imagined the line, but that's as far as she got. Stepping over it might take a little while to achieve, but she was patient, if nothing else. The spell of unsettled weather across the southwest wasn't showing any sign of easing, and the rain was splattering against the windows as the wind picked up. As the rhythmic sound of the raindrops pulled her into sleep, her thoughts drifted to images of the chapel standing atop the hill, against the backdrop of a shadowy, darkened sky. Chapter 28. Alice, 1945. "I hate this bloody place," said Alice, as she pushed open the door to the chapel. "It's always given me the creeps too," said Lily. As they entered the chapel, the cold air was a welcome greeting in contrast to the June sun, which had been particularly warm for the past few days. Today it felt hot and muggy. "Oh, it's nice in here," said Alice, puffing a strand of hair from her face. She placed the cleaning bucket on the stone floor. Mrs. Hartwell had tasked the girls with freshening up the interior in preparation for the vicar coming over to perform a blessing. Now the war was over, Mrs. Hartwell wanted to start making more use of the chapel, and to her mind, a blessing and a small service of thanks was ideal. There was no running water at the chapel, so Alice and Lily had carried a bucket each up the hill. Paolo had seen them and had left what he was doing to come over and take the buckets from them. "You must let me help you," he said to Alice. "You should not be carrying heavy things." Alice had been grateful, even though she felt she was capable. She didn't want to offend Paolo and refuse his help. Carlo had appeared a few moments later and had insisted on taking Lily's bucket for her. "Thank you so much," said Alice, as Paolo set the bucket of water down near the altar. "You are welcome," he replied. There was a shy smile to his mouth, and Alice found herself returning the smile, except rather more broadly. They stood awkwardly looking at each other. "Oh, would you like a sip of water?" Alice held out the flask she'd shoved in her pocket earlier. "No, I am fine, thank you," said Paolo. "You must drink plenty of water, and eat and rest too." Alice laughed. "You sound like a fussing mother hen." Paolo frowned. "A mother hen?" "Clucking around, making sure everyone is all right," explained Alice. At this remark, Lily made a scoffing sort of noise. "I think it's a bit more than that." She raised her eyebrows innocently at the look Alice gave her. "We must go back to work," said Carlo, having placed Lily's bucket on the ground. "Please, when you have finished, if you need us, come and get us." "Oh, we will," Lily assured him. Alice rolled her eyes, and she and Paolo laughed again at the not-so-subtle flirting. "How are you?" asked Paolo, as they walked to the door. "Not so bad." Alice smoothed her hand over her stomach. "I'm supposed to be blooming, according to Cook." "Blooming?" "Be at my best and enjoying being pregnant," explained Alice, with little conviction. "But you are not?" Paolo's voice was full of concern. "The couple who are adopting the baby are visiting next week." "And that makes you sad?" "A bit." Alice looked away for a second. "I didn't think it would be this hard. Giving up the baby. I have to stop myself from thinking about it, but sometimes I can't help it." "I think it is a very hard thing that you are doing. It must be the hardest thing you have to do as a mother." He went to touch her arm, but withdrew his hand before he did so. For no reason that Alice could fathom, she reached out and caught Paolo's hand. "It is the right thing to do, isn't it?" She didn't know why she was asking an Italian soldier, but Paolo seemed wise beyond his years, and she didn't think he judged her. He considered her carefully, and was just about to say something when Carlo called to him.
Come, Paolo. We will be missed, and then that idiot Billy will be after us.
It's all right. You go on, said Alice, when she saw Paolo hesitate. I don't want Billy getting on at you. He's in a bad mood today. I heard Mrs. Hartwell telling him to stop being so miserable, and that now the war was over, he should look to broaden his horizons. In other words, she wishes he'd clear off, said Lily, just like the rest of us wish.
I wish he would go too,
said Paolo, and then to Alice,
We will speak later.
He and Carlo jogged off down the hill towards the field they were working in. Oh, he likes you, said Lily, nudging Alice. He is just being friendly. Anyway, you're the one flirting with Carlo. Oh, I'm not judging you. In fact, I think they're both very nice, despite being Italian POWs. Alice chose not to challenge the despite bit. As far as I'm concerned, they are just young men, stuck here until they can go home again. Better not let Billy hear you say that. They went back inside the chapel. He was looking daggers at Paolo this morning, after you said good morning to him. Billy is ridiculously childish. They spent the morning cleaning the chapel, and by lunchtime it was certainly looking and smelling a lot fresher. We can manage the buckets now they're empty, said Alice, as she sloshed the last of the grey water out onto the fields. The weather had changed in the space of a few hours, from a hot summer's day to one more used to showing up in winter. The sky had clouded over, and the wind had picked up, causing Alice's dress to flap around, the hem whacking at her knees. Lily was wearing trousers, but Alice could no longer fit into hers. We're in for some rain by the look of it, said Lily. As Alice turned back to the chapel, she saw Aggie heading up the hill towards them, with little Jack alongside her. Alice waved at the cousins. Cook sent us up. Aggie puffed as she reached them, with Jack trailing behind, his cap pulled down low and his gaze trained on the ground. Aggie glanced back at him briefly before addressing Alice and Lily again. Billy's in a bad mood. Alice rolled her eyes. What's new? I've brought lunch. Aggie held up a basket with a tea towel over it. Cook filled it up. Alice exchanged a look with Lily. They both understood the unspoken message from Cook to stay out of Billy's way. We'd better go back into the chapel. It's going to rain any minute now, said Alice. The quartet took themselves inside. Alice and Lily sat in one pew with Aggie and Jack in the pew in front. Aggie passed over a ham sandwich to each of them. Her hand shook a little as she did so. Is everything all right? Asked Alice, taking the food from the 12-year-old. Aggie avoided eye contact, but nodded her head. Yes, fine. No, it's not, retorted Jack, not turning to look at Alice or Lily. Shh, Jack. Aggie's voice was low and urgent. What's going on? Asked Alice. One of you needs to tell me, or I'm going down to the house right this minute to find out. Billy is going to knock that bloody Itai's head off, said Jack. Alice took a sharp intake of breath. Paolo? Jack looked around and nodded. It was then Alice noticed that he had a black eye. She took another intake of breath. What happened to you? You're not supposed to say, scolded Aggie. She turned to Alice. You can't make him tell you. I can, and I will, said Alice, putting her sandwich down. She reached over the pew, and with her hand cupping Jack's chin, she turned him around to face her and took off his cap. Someone's hit you, haven't they? Jack was trying desperately to hold back the tears. You can tell me, Jack. You won't be in trouble, and it will save me asking at the house. What happened? Billy hit me. Anguish filled Jack's voice. I hate him. Why did he hit you? Asked Alice, looking once again at Lily, who had an equally shocked expression on her face. Jack was sticking up for you, said Aggie. Me? I don't understand. Please, someone just tell me what happened. He saw Paolo up here with you earlier, carrying the bucket, explained Aggie. When Paolo came back down, Billy went looking for him, punched him, yelled at him to stay away from you. Alice let out a cry. Punched Paolo? Aggie nodded. Aunt Louise came rushing out, shouting at Billy she was. Alice felt sick at the thought. What happened to Jack? Billy came back in the kitchen in such a bad temper, he just lashed out at Jack for being in the way, explained Aggie. Swore at him and everything. Jack caught his face on the kitchen table as he fell. I hate him, said Jack again. Alice ran her hand over his head. Poor you, Jack. What did your mum say? She doesn't know, admitted Aggie. Cook said best not to say anything. It would only cause more trouble. That's why she sent us up here with the picnic. When we go back down, we will have to say Jack caught his face on a tree or something. They sat in silence for a few moments. The ham sandwich suddenly didn't taste as nice as it had a minute ago. I don't know why Billy would behave like that, said Alice after a while. Are you stupid? Scoffed Lily. Haven't you seen the way he looks at you? Alice glanced in the direction of the younger ones and gave a shake of her head towards Lily, with an expression which said, not now. Lily is right, said Aggie. He watches you all the time. Alice shivered at the thought and was decidedly uncomfortable that a 12-year-old girl had noticed. I've no idea why he'd be interested in me. Her hand automatically stroked her stomach. He's waiting. Aggie looked at Lily as if asking permission to continue. He was like that before, with the other girl who was here, waiting until she'd had her baby, and then, you know. Alice shook her head. What? I heard Cook saying Billy thinks the girls who come to Telton Hall are fair game once they've had their babies, said Aggie. That's enough now, said Lily. Eat your sandwiches. We'll have no more talk of Billy. The idea of Billy making advances to poor young women who'd just had a baby made Alice feel physically sick. Billy disgusted her. There was no way on this earth he was going to do that to her, over her dead body. She turned her thoughts to Paolo and hoped he was all right. She'd tried to speak to him later in the day. Billy had no right to do that to him, and as for Jack, the poor little lad must be terrified. The more she stewed about Billy and what he'd done, the angrier and more outraged she became. She wished she could teach that bullying git a lesson. When tea time came and Paolo didn't appear at the table, Alice's heart dropped. Billy came in and stood there for a moment, looking around at the faces. His gaze paused on the empty chair. Oh, where's the eye-tie tonight? Not eating with us? Carlo shifted in his chair, looking at Billy, but said nothing. Alice could feel the tension oozing from Carlo. If anyone personified the expression of looks killing, then he had perfected it. Paolo is having tea in his room tonight, said Cook, as she placed a pot of stew in the centre of the table. Best place for him, snarled Billy. You didn't want to stay with your mate, then? Carlo lifted his chin, and whatever he was about to say was cut off by Mrs. Hartwell. Did you hear that Margaret Hemmings had her baby? I saw Anne Roberts, the midwife, in the shop this morning. She'd just come from Margaret, a healthy baby boy. Now, isn't that good news? Mrs. Hartwell was in full swing, going into as much detail as she could in a bid to divert the conversation. It had the desired effect, and Billy sat down at the table opposite Alice. Throughout the meal, Alice kept her eyes down, looking at her food. She was hyper-alert to Billy after what the girls had said in the chapel earlier that day. She could feel his gaze on her, and when he tried to engage her in conversation, she still refused to look at him. Making her excuses, Alice left the table first. She didn't wait for pudding, even though she was still hungry. She just wanted to get away from Billy. Out in the garden, where dusk was drawing in, the wind was whipping up a frenzy now. She really should go back inside, but Alice needed the fresh air. It was poisonous, stale and evil inside the house. Billy was the carbon dioxide to her oxygen, and she didn't want to be anywhere near him. Pulling her cardigan around her, Alice headed over to the rose garden behind the tall hedge. She liked it in there, and if she stood underneath the willow tree, she could see who was approaching from the house. If it was Billy, it would give her time to nip out through the back of the garden and around the side of the house. It wasn't until she reached the hanging boughs of the tree that she realised she wasn't alone. She gave a small yelp. Paolo stepped out from under the branches.
"It's only me. Don't be scared."
"You made me jump."
"Sorry."
As Alice neared him, she noticed he had his head turned to one side. She came to a halt in front of him and lifted her hand to his cheek, turning his face towards her, just as she had done to Jack earlier. His eye was black and swollen, almost closed, and his lip was split. He'd clearly been hit more than once.
"Oh, Paolo, I'm so sorry," she whispered.
Paolo turned away from her and stepped back under the shelter of the willow tree.
"Do not feel sorry for me."
Alice followed him, her anger towards Billy fueled yet again. She didn't know what to say. What could she say? Standing in front of him again, her hands sought his.
"You should have fought back. He deserves a good thumping himself."
"That is not my way," replied Paolo softly.
"Besides, if I had, then he would have me sent back to the camp. I do not want that. Not now."
He paused, lifting her hand and brushing her knuckles with his lips.
"I would miss you."
Alice nodded and swallowed. She could feel her body tense with nerves, but she managed to speak.
"I would miss you, too."
Paolo pulled her towards him, embracing her in his arms. Alice resisted for a fraction of a second before slipping her arms around him. They stood together for a long moment, holding each other. His body warmed her to her soul, and her heart contracted at the sensation. It was only the howl of the wind and the deluge of rain exploding from the sky that made them pull apart.
"You should go inside. You will get wet and cold. I do not want you to get ill," said Paolo.
"What about you?"
"I will be in soon."
"You must be starving."
"Cook gave me some food. Now, please, Alice, go inside."
Alice rose on tiptoes and gave Paolo the briefest of kisses before running back to the house. The rain still managed to soak through her clothes, such was the downpour. "My goodness, look at you," cried Cook. "You're soaked. You'll catch your death of cold. Now go upstairs and put some dry clothes on. Light that fire in your room and dry yourself off good and proper." Alice didn't argue. It might be the middle of summer, but she was cold and wet, and the thought of a fire to warm her up was too appealing to dismiss. As she darted past the living room, she could hear Lily talking to Mrs. Hartwell. Billy was no doubt in there too, and Alice was glad she had a legitimate excuse not to join them that evening. Up in her room, she lit the fire, then slipped out of her dress and dried herself, putting on her nightdress, by which time the fire was burning well. She wrapped a blanket around herself and huddled in front of the hearth, thinking of Paolo. She closed her eyes and let her mind replay those few moments with him under the willow tree. Chapter 29. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda stirred from her sleep and rolled over. She could taste something strange in the back of her throat. It was making her choke. She coughed and was aware she was throwing her head from side to side. Something was covering her mouth. Smoke. There was a fire, but she was trapped. As she clawed at her mouth, she came around from her sleep properly and realised she'd been having some awful dream about being trapped in the chapel by a fire. She shivered, and a cold sensation travelled from her head to her toes. It was dark, the night-time kind of dark. She felt as if she'd been asleep for ages, and that it should be the morning. The wind was blowing hard outside, and she could hear the rain splattering against the window. She leaned over to the bedside table and switched on the lamp so she could see the time. It was just gone midnight. She was at Telton Hall, Nate having brought her back earlier that day. He had been so kind and comforting at her flat. It had made her feel cared for. It had also made her feel vulnerable, but for some inexplicable reason, it didn't scare her as it usually did. In fact, Nate had also made her feel safe. She wasn't sure anyone other than Dean had ever made her feel like that. Rhoda's throat was parched, and she wished she'd thought to bring a glass of water up with her. Did she really want to get out of bed and pad down to the kitchen in the middle of the night? The answer was no, but she really needed a drink. "Sod it," she huffed, throwing back the duvet and pulling on her fleece over her pyjamas. She found her socks and pulled them on, making a mental note to bring her slippers when she came back the next week. Telton Hall was a draughty old house, where the cold snatched at your feet and ankles if you sat still for too long. Using her phone as a torch, Rhoda slipped out into the hallway. The floorboard creaked under her foot, and she hoped she wouldn't disturb Jack. There wasn't any light coming from under his bedroom door, and she assumed he must be in bed, fast asleep. She didn't want to risk putting the hall light on in case it shone through under his door, besides the fact she didn't know where the light switch was, and couldn't be bothered fumbling around trying to find it. The stair carpet muffled her footsteps, and she made her way around and down to the ground floor. It was then she noticed the living room door was open, and an orangey glow was flickering from within the room. For some reason, she didn't know why, Rhoda slid her phone into her pocket to hide the torchlight. She paused at the doorway. Through the crack at the hinged side of the door, she could see Jack sitting in his chair. In front of him was some sort of box, and he was taking what looked like folded reams of paper and tossing them onto the fire. Up to this point, Tink had been happily snoozing in her basket, but her ears pricked up and she lifted her head. She was looking straight at the door. Rhoda shot back out of view, holding her breath as she pressed herself up against the wall. She could hear the silence expand in the room, pushing against the walls and seeping out around the door. She knew with absolute certainty Jack was looking towards the hallway. She could feel his eyes boring through the wall and into the back of her head. She wanted to swallow, but was scared even that would be too loud and he would hear her. "Good girl," she heard Jack say. And then there was the sound of the lid being put on the box. Jack gave a small grunt and shuffled across the wooden parquet floor. Rhoda stayed perfectly still, not daring to look, as she tried to imagine what he was doing. There was the sound of a cupboard door being opened, accompanied by another couple of grunts, as the box must have been put inside. She heard the click of a lock, and then the distinctive tinkling sound of something metal, probably the key, being dropped into something ceramic, possibly a cup or a vase. This was followed by a small clonk, and Rhoda guessed the vessel was being put on a shelf somewhere. "Right, you ready for bed?" Jack was talking to the little dog. Rhoda closed her eyes for a second. The last thing she wanted was to be caught now. How was she going to explain herself? Quickly, she nipped back to the staircase and took her phone from her pocket. Tink gave a couple of barks. "What's up, girl?" she could hear Jack saying. "Is that you, Rhoda?" he called out. "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you," she called back, trying to keep her breathing calm. Tink trotted out of the living room, with Jack following. He shut the door behind him. "You all right?" He eyed her closely. Rhoda forced a smile. "Yes, fine. Just needed a glass of water." "Help yourself. You know where it is. I'm just heading up to bed. Everything's locked up." "Okay. Night, Jack. See you in the morning." Rhoda went down to the kitchen. Her heart was certainly getting a workout. Even her legs felt wobbly. It was like being in the middle of a spinning class at the gym. She ran herself a glass of water and drank it down in one go before refilling it to take back upstairs. Rhoda waited several minutes. She wanted to be sure Jack was tucked up in bed and not planning on coming down. Satisfied she wouldn't be disturbed, Rhoda hurried along the hallway to the living room. Jack had left the lamp on at the foot of the stairs, so she tucked her phone into her pocket. Very carefully and slowly, she clasped the doorknob with one hand and rested the palm of her other hand against the door itself. Please don't let it be a squeaky door. Rhoda turned the handle and eased the door open. There was a small squeak, but fortunately no other sound. The fire had died out, but there was just enough light from the glow of the hall lamp to enable her to see what she was doing. There in the fireplace were the cinders of the burned reams of paper, still holding their shape. At the back of them was a half-burned envelope. Even in the dim light, Rhoda recognised it as the same type of off-white ledger envelope she and Nate had found in the study. She reached in and plucked it from the ashes. It was stuffed with papers and must have been too thick to catch light properly. Rhoda blew on the singed edges to make sure they weren't still smouldering and pushed the wadge into her pocket. She stood up and looked around the living room, wondering where Jack had put the box. Along the back wall were 2 bookcases with cupboards underneath. Her eyes travelled upwards. An Art Deco-style vase was on top of the bookcase. She knew, without having to look, that it was where Jack had popped the key. She was just about to reach up for the vase when she heard Tink yap. How the hell did that bloody dog know Rhoda was poking around in the living room? Rhoda decided not to push her luck. She'd have to look the next day, when Jack was out of the house. Taking care to close the door quietly behind her, Rhoda went up the stairs, remembering to pick up the glass of water she'd left on the telephone table while she was snooping around. As she reached the top stair and went to turn right to her bedroom, she practically walked into something. Make that someone. She let out a scream and jumped back, her water slopping from the glass. "Sorry," said Jack, stepping out of the shadows. "Think Tink needs to go out." "It's okay. Don't worry," Rhoda managed to say through ragged breaths. "Got my glass of water." She held up the glass as proof. She was flustered and was certain Jack knew it. "Good night." She sidestepped her host and headed for her room. As soon as she was inside with the door closed, Rhoda took a deep, stabilising breath, in and out. She listened with her ear against the door to Jack's footsteps on the stairs as he made his way to the ground floor to let Tink out. She eyed the skeleton key in the lock of her door for a moment before turning it. The gentle click of the deadbolt falling into place, a reassuring sound. Feeling wide awake now, Rhoda flicked on the main light and sat on her bed with the charred remains of the envelope, the handwritten number 1945 still legible. Very carefully, she teased the papers out, unfolding them and spreading them out on her bed, keeping them in the same order. They had all been meticulously folded, exactly the same way up, so Rhoda was only able to read what was on the right-hand side of each page. Most of them were invoices and receipts. The description of the works these related to were clearer on some than others. Rhoda had to guess what might have been on the left-hand side of the page. She stopped when she came to one for the 28th of June, 1945. The first part of the description had been burned away, but the words "paving slabs ×3" were still visible. There was a price in the figure column. There were also some more figures below, but the description must only have been short. Rhoda's stomach gave a little tumble of excitement. These could logically be the new paving stones used at the chapel, and this document would tie in to when the body was buried there. She scanned the papers strewn across the bed, snatching up the one which had the words M.E. sheet still visible. She guessed it was a timesheet, where Louise Hartwell had kept a log of who was doing what on the farm. She swore out loud. The names had all been destroyed from the fire, and all that was left were the locations of the workers and what days they were working. She could see someone had been assigned to work at the chapel, but it didn't say who. Before putting everything away, Rhoda took photographs of what she considered to be the important information. More pieces of a puzzle. She had a rough idea where they went, but couldn't quite match them up with any of the other pieces yet. It was like trying to do a jigsaw without the lid of the box. Rhoda had finally drifted off to sleep, listening to the relaxation app she had on her phone. She hadn't used it in a while, but that night she knew her brain was in danger of going into overdrive. She had sleepless episodes from time to time, something that had been with her since childhood, and often occurred when there was a lot of uncertainty in her life. She didn't like it and couldn't stop it, but these days she had coping strategies she could fall back on. Jack was in the kitchen making a pot of tea when Rhoda went down at 8 o'clock. "Ah, that's good timing," he said. "Just made a fresh brew." Tink trotted over to her from her place in front of the Aga, and Rhoda crouched down to make a fuss of the dog. "Have you been up long?" she asked Jack. "Up with the dawn. Not that I've got anything to get up for these days, but old habits die hard." "I usually get up early for a morning swim in the sea," said Rhoda, standing up. Tink went straight back to her blanket. "I think I'll have a walk instead, before I start work." After a quick cup of tea with Jack, Rhoda set off for a brisk walk. As she reached the end of the drive, she could see the light on in Aggie's cottage. There was the X5 parked at the side of the cottage again. She wondered if Aggie had some sort of home help in the mornings, although the man she'd seen the other day didn't look like a home carer. Not that she should stereotype, of course. The village was slowly waking up, getting ready for the day. The little cafe that she and Nate had visited for lunch was open, and Rhoda nipped in to grab a takeaway latte. "Morning," said the woman behind the counter. "Nice to see you again." Rhoda was surprised the woman had remembered her. "Hello. You're here early, staying at Telton Hall, are you?" The woman smiled. "Belinda Marshall. What can I get you?" "Rhoda Sullivan. Latte, please, and yes, I'm staying here while I work on the stained glass window of the chapel." She suspected Belinda knew this already. "It's being taken away to some museum, isn't it?" said Belinda. "That's right. Singlewood Open Air Museum. They specialise in conserving old buildings. I work for them. I think the village will be pleased to see it go, although not so pleased to see a load of new housing going up. Poor old Jack didn't have any choice in it." Belinda spoke over the noise of the coffee machine gushing hot milk into the cup. "Pleased to see it go?" queried Rhoda. "Well, apart from finding those old bones up at the chapel, the place itself hasn't had a happy history. Jack Hartwell's father died in a nasty machinery accident. All those poor young pregnant girls who had to give their babies up, those prisoners of war where one was killed. Jack Hartwell's wife going off and leaving him." Belinda put the latte on the counter and tapped at the electronic till. "It's all bad luck up there." Rhoda nearly missed the line Belinda had slipped in about the death of a POW. "Sorry, when you say a POW was killed, do you know any more about that?" "Before my time, dear. I may look old enough to have been around in the 40s, but that's what working every day in a cafe does for you." Belinda gave a laugh and held out the card machine for Rhoda to wave her bank card over. "No, that's just something that everyone knows about." "Everyone?" Rhoda tucked her card back into her pocket. Why hadn't the Hartwells mentioned the POW death to her or the police? "How did the POW die, do you know?" "Fell from the hayloft and broke his neck. Freak accident. I don't know the details. I'm not sure anyone really does. You know what these stories are like when they get passed around and down." Rhoda thanked Belinda for the latte and headed back to Telton Hall. All the time, the same question was going around her head. Why hadn't anyone mentioned the POW death? Was it the glazier, Paolo Sartori, who had fallen and died? Or another prisoner? By the time she reached the driveway to Telton Hall, she knew she had to find out what had happened to Paolo Sartori. There must be Italian army records for him, and she might be able to find him on the Italian ancestry database. What she needed to do was to find out if he was still alive, or if he had died at Telton Hall. Rhoda looked over at Telton Cottage. The driveway stood empty of any sign of Aggie's early morning visitor. Despite the warnings Nate's aunt had dished out to them, Rhoda was unperturbed. She was just going to ask her outright. Before she had a chance to change her mind, Rhoda was knocking on the front door. She felt it too forward to go around to the back, as Nate had. A sharp tap on the living room window had Rhoda stepping back. Aggie was at the window, which she pushed open. "What do you want?" Aggie clearly wasn't pretending she was pleased to see Rhoda. "Hello, Aggie. I wanted to ask you something, if I may," Rhoda began. "If it's about the chapel, then you're wasting your breath. It's about the POWs that were at Telton Hall." Rhoda spoke quickly before Aggie had a chance to interrupt. "One of them fell from the hayloft and broke his neck. Is that right? Do you know where Paolo Sartori is now? Was he the one who died?" Aggie's eyes narrowed and eyed the takeaway coffee cup in Rhoda's hand. "Where have you been hearing all that nonsense? Don't tell me. Belinda Marshall. Village gossip. What she doesn't know, she makes up." "I was also told there was a wedding between one of the POWs and one of the girls who stayed at Telton Hall, Alice Renshaw. You were bridesmaid, apparently." Aggie's face paled and she swallowed hard. "I don't know who you heard that from, but it wasn't me. Sylvia Montgomery seemed to think it was." "Well, she's wrong. I think I'd know if I was bridesmaid or not. Now, like I've said before, leave well alone. You're only stirring up unnecessary trouble and upset for people who were around at the time, and that includes me." With that, she pulled the window shut and, with one quick movement, yanked the curtain across. Conversation well and truly ended. Rhoda headed back across the road, feeling frustrated. It was becoming a familiar feeling where the Hartwell family were concerned. She needed to grab her phone and the chapel key from her room. As she came around the back of Telton Hall, she looked in through the kitchen window, but there was no sign of Jack. She tried the handle, half expecting it to be locked, as Nate had instructed, but the door opened freely. She didn't know whether to be pleased or not. Rhoda nipped up the stairs to her bedroom and grabbed her phone from the bedside table and the key from the drawer, slipping them both into the side pockets of her utility trousers. The ringing sound of the old-fashioned telephones dotted around the house made Rhoda jump. It was a wonder there weren't more heart attacks back in the day, when these things rang so violently and loudly. The phone was being particularly demanding, and with no answer phone to cut in, the shrill ringing was grating on Rhoda's nerves. She was debating whether to answer the damn thing herself when it stopped. Thank goodness for that. Rhoda jogged down the sweeping staircase. She could hear Jack's voice. It was low and insistent. For some unexplained reason, Rhoda stopped outside the door. Once again, she felt compelled to spy on Jack Hartwell. "You're going to take it too far," he was saying. "You need to stop." Rhoda's heart gave an extra beat. She wiped her damp palms together. There was a pause for several seconds before Jack spoke again. "I'm not happy about this. Yes, I know that. It will all blow over. Just be patient. What do you mean it's too late?" There was another long pause, and when Jack spoke again, his voice was heavy with defeat. "Okay, but I still don't like it." Rhoda was determined not to be caught hanging around outside the living room again. The previous night, she was sure Jack had been suspicious of her, and she really didn't want to add fuel to the fire. She didn't know what he was talking about, or who he was talking to, but she didn't like the idea and felt sure she wasn't a million miles away from the topic of conversation. Rhoda hurried out of the house and up the hill to the chapel. She couldn't wait to be inside, where she could lock the door and feel safe. Weirdly, for all its ominous atmosphere, the building was also a safe haven. Even so, Rhoda checked the chapel as she had previously, and, satisfied she was alone, locked the door. She had one last small window to do. This one was the highest, being over the main entrance door. The scaffolders had erected a fixed tower in advance of this job, as the tower would be too high for her to move it around, as she had for the lower side windows. With her bag on her shoulder, Rhoda pulled herself up the ladder and onto the first level. It wobbled a fraction, and Rhoda paused. looking down to check the feet were firmly in place and the stabilising feet were all out. It wasn't unusual for scaffolding to feel unsteady, but it was something she'd got used to, and it was strange that she had hesitated. She continued her ascent up the side, reaching the middle platform, which was level with the top of the oak door. Just a few more feet, and she'd be up on the third platform, where she'd be working from. She hoisted her bag higher on her shoulder and climbed the remaining side rungs to the third level. Rhoda pushed her bag onto the walkboards and then climbed on, using the bottom guardrail to pull herself up. The window was circular, with a simple design of a white dove and a rainbow behind it. Rhoda wondered if this was what had given Paolo Sartori the inspiration for the main window. She rested her hand on the top guardrail to take a closer look at the fixtures. As she leaned forwards, the guardrail suddenly gave way at one end. Rhoda screamed as she lost her balance and felt herself pitching forwards. She managed to throw her weight to one side to stop herself going through the small gap between the scaffolding tower and the interior wall of the chapel. With a thud, she landed on the walkboards, her left side taking the impact. The metal guardrail clattered against the wall at the same time. Rhoda lay perfectly still as her heart raced. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her neck. After several seconds, her brain kicked into gear. Without moving her head, she looked at the guardrail. It was still clipped into place at one end, and the other end was resting on the walkboard next to her. Logically, she would be right to assume it was just that one piece of scaffolding that had somehow come loose. Gingerly, Rhoda rolled onto her back. She groaned at the pain in her hip as she shuffled her body over. She was probably going to have a nasty bruise there. Her next move was to get herself into a sitting position. Again, she managed this, and the scaffolding tower stood steady. All she had to do now was to get herself down from there in one piece. Her eyes sought out the ground 15 feet beneath her, concrete slabs directly below, and hard wooden pews on the flanks. Neither was an inviting landing. With her bag back on her shoulder, Rhoda made a tentative and cautious descent, her confidence in the tower improving with every step down on the ladder rungs. It was just the top guardrail that hadn't been fixed properly. By the time she reached the floor of the chapel, her fear had been overtaken by anger. Those bloody scaffolders not doing their job properly. There could have been a very different ending had it been the guardrail on the opposite side. It was just good fortune it was on the side against the wall. Where was their number? She was going to get on the phone to them right that second and give them a piece of her mind. Amateurs. As she waited for the call to be answered, she paced the central aisle up to the altar and back to the tower. Her phone bleeped to tell her there was an incoming call from an unknown number. Rhoda never ignored unknown numbers. There was always the possibility it would be someone phoning about Dean. Without hesitation, she ended the call to the scaffolders and answered the new caller. "Hello, Rhoda Sullivan speaking." There was a small silence. Then a raspy, whispered voice came through the phone. "Mind your own business. Wouldn't want a nasty accident to happen." Rhoda had heard the expression of blood running cold, but up until that point, she'd never experienced it. "Who is this?" she demanded. "This is your last warning." With that, the line went dead. This is the end of CD 7. The book continues on CD 8. CD 8. Chapter 30. Alice, 1945. That night, the storm raged without letting up. From her bedroom window, Alice could see the trees being whipped back and forth by the howling wind. The kitchen garden, although protected by the brick wall, was still taking a battering. Canes were blown over, the buckets stacked in the corner had tumbled across the path, and the glass in the greenhouse was rattling so much Alice was certain not all the panes would survive the night. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, she could hear the constant sound of metal flapping around. She suspected it was a piece of corrugated iron roof on the stables. She hoped Pegasus, the horse, would be all right in there. "Why don't you get back to bed?" said a sleepy Lily, pulling the blanket higher up over her shoulder. Alice climbed back into her bed, but it was a long time before she finally fell asleep. When she awoke in the morning, the first thing she did was look out of the window. Although the wind was still apparent, the worst of the storm had blown itself out. The kitchen garden looked wrecked, with bits of wood and canes scattered across the raised beds. As she'd suspected, one of the windows in the greenhouse was cracked, where the watering can had been blown into it. She looked up towards the chapel. Something didn't look right, but it took a while for her to realise what it was. "The tree's gone over up on the hill," she said in alarm, suddenly realising what looked different. "What?" came the bleary response from Lily. She pushed the blankets back and came to stand at the window with Alice. "Oh, crikey!" "Sadly, it doesn't look like it's brought the awful place down, though," said Alice. "The other tree's still standing by the look of it." They got dressed and went down for breakfast, where talk of the storm was on the menu, and of how much damage had been done to the chapel. Alice was pleased when Paolo appeared at the table, but upset that the side of his face looked worse than yesterday. She kept trying to catch his eye, but he avoided looking at her, probably because Billy was there, and, as usual, was monitoring her constantly. "Paolo and Carlo went up there first thing this morning," Mrs. Hartwell was saying. "The tree has smashed the main window." "How bad is it?" Billy asked. "That's going to cost a fair bit to fix." "Paolo thinks most of it will need replacing," replied Mrs. Hartwell. "What does he know?" snorted Billy. "Actually, it's his trade," explained Mrs. Hartwell. "Paolo's father was a glassmaker back in Italy, had his own business and taught Paolo the trade." Billy chose not to comment. "Maybe Paolo could fix it then," suggested Alice. This comment earned her a look from everyone at the table. "I was thinking that myself." Mrs. Hartwell looked to Paolo. "Do you think you could repair the window, or make some new glass for it?" "It will not be easy," said Paolo, "but I can do it." "Really, Louise? Are you going to let some eye-tie loose on the window?" Billy's tone was nothing short of derisory. "I'm sure there are some English glaziers who can do just as good, if not better, job." "I would like Paolo to do it," said Mrs. Hartwell firmly. "It will be my pleasure," said Paolo. "We can get Ted from the Chandlers to look at it," said Billy. "No, I said I want Paolo to do it," insisted Mrs. Hartwell, and when Billy went to protest, she cut him off. "It is up to me, you know." Billy shoved the last spoonful of porridge into his mouth, followed by a swig of his tea, before standing up, holding on to his stick and kicking the chair away behind him. "Who am I to argue with the owner?" With that, he stomped as best he could out of the kitchen. With Billy gone, the atmosphere in the kitchen changed immediately, as if not just the occupants, but also the building itself gave a sigh of relief. "Someone's in a bad mood," muttered Lily. "I'm sure he was born in a bad mood," said Mrs. Hartwell. It was the first time Alice had heard Mrs. Hartwell speak ill of anyone, but she could quite see how Billy would drive even the most patient of people to distraction. Poor Mrs. Hartwell, she must be so sick of hearing Billy moan and groan about everything. After breakfast was over, Mrs. Hartwell spoke at some length with Paolo about the chapel, while Alice and Lily cleared up the kitchen to get it ready for when Cook arrived later that morning. "We need to cut the tree into logs to get it out of the window," Paolo was saying. "We will need ropes, saws, and the tractor or Pegasus to pull the tree away from the chapel." "Use the tractor. It will be easier. We have enough fuel for it," Mrs. Hartwell instructed. Make a list of tools and materials you will need to fix the window. I'll go into the village to get everything organised. It turned out to be a couple of days before all the equipment Paolo had requested was delivered to Telton Hall. Alice went out to the fields to find Paolo. His eye wasn't looking so bad, and Alice was glad there seemed to be no permanent damage. She had taken to seeking him out at the end of the day, just to talk to him and spend a little time in his company. "I've been sent to fetch you," she said. "There's a delivery in the yard, all the things you need for the chapel window." Paolo's eyes lit up.
"That is good. I am looking forward to repairing the window. It will remind me of days before the war, when life was kind and I worked for my father."
He gave a wistful sigh. "You miss your home and family a lot, don't you?"
"Very much. I have not seen them for so long."
"Hopefully it won't be too long before you can go home." As Alice said the words, she felt a pang of sadness. She'd miss Paolo when he left, if she was still here, that was. "I wonder which one of us will leave Telton Hall first." Paolo raised his eyebrows, a small look of amusement on his face.
"I think it will be you. I do not think I will be going home before Christmas."
"I don't know if I want to go home," admitted Alice. "There's nothing to go home for."
"But your father?"
She shook her head. "I don't know if I can. It's not that I don't love him and he doesn't love me, but there is so much pain involved in being at home. We remind each other of who we have lost. My mother. Without her, we're broken pieces of the Renshaw puzzle."
"Puzzle?"
"Oh, ignore me. I'm getting all deep and emotional." Alice forced a smile to her face and swiftly changed the subject. "Here, I nearly forgot." From her pocket, she took out a rock cake Cook had made that afternoon. It was still warm, and she pushed it into Paolo's hand. "Eat it quickly, before anyone sees."
"I should not,"
began Paolo. "You jolly well should. Cook gave that to me, and if I want to give it to you, then I can."
"In that case, I do not want to offend you, and I shall eat it."
Paolo broke it in half and popped one piece in his mouth, offering the other to Alice, who declined. "I've already had one. Cook gave me two, but she said I wasn't to tell anyone."
"You are very kind to me."
"And you are to me," replied Alice. They walked so close their shoulders touched, and their hands brushed against each other's. At some point, by unspoken mutual agreement, their fingers entwined, and they walked hand in hand in a warm and comfortable silence. It felt so natural to hold Paolo's hand, but at the same time, ripples of excitement reverberated through Alice's whole body. As they neared the outbuildings, Paolo stopped before they reached the corner of the stable. He turned to Alice and, without saying a word, dipped his head and kissed her. This time, it wasn't a fleeting brush of the lips. Alice found herself responding. It was exciting and scary all at the same time. Eventually, she pulled away and nestled her head against his chest.
"I have something for you."
From his pocket, Paolo produced a ring.
"I made it from a penny."
"Oh, Paolo, that's amazing," said Alice, looking at the penny ring. "You made this? How?" Paolo lifted Alice's hand and slipped the ring onto the third finger of her right hand.
"With the hammer, I shaped it around the bar of the hay feeder."
"You're so clever. Thank you so much." Alice's heart swelled with happiness. To think Paolo had made this with his own hands, just for her. She wasn't sure she'd ever been given such a wonderful present. She hugged Paolo tightly, which wasn't so easy now her stomach was starting to get in the way. Pegasus whinnied from his stable, alerting Alice and Paolo that someone was approaching. Alice jumped away from Paolo just as Billy's voice rang out in the yard.
"Oi, Sartori, get here now."
Alice wasn't one for being intimidated, but she knew Billy wouldn't like it if he saw her and Paolo together. "You go," she whispered. "I'll go around the other way." She gave Paolo a gentle shove as he stood his ground. He was a proud man, but Alice knew standing up to Billy was not the most sensible thing to do. She hurried off around the back of the stables, glancing back at Paolo, who then disappeared around the corner and into the yard. Alice could hear Billy berating Paolo, telling him to get a move on. She wasn't one for hating people. It was a wasted emotion. But she was sure she hated Billy. Alice didn't see Paolo for the rest of the day, as he was busy up at the chapel, and Mrs. Hartwell had her in the house, sorting out the airing cupboard. Alice wasn't sure the cupboard needed much tidying, but appreciated the opportunity to work quietly indoors. Mrs. Hartwell had the radiogram playing some classical music, and the gentle melodies drifted up from the room below. From time to time, Alice could hear Mrs. Hartwell humming along to the tunes, and it reminded her of her own mother, who used to do the same. Alice had been so busy settling into life at Telton Hall, and so exhausted in the evenings, that she realised she hadn't thought about her mother as much as usual. However, her conversation with Paolo had triggered her emotions, and she wished she could tell her mother all about him. She was sure that she'd understand, and that it wouldn't worry her he was Italian. Alice wasn't so sure her father would approve, but to be honest, he would probably never know. She should really inquire after her father, and considered either writing to him or asking Mrs. Hartwell if she could speak with her sister, Mrs. Armitage, from the big house back home, to find out how he was. Lost in thought about her parents, Alice didn't hear the tread on the staircase behind her until the last moment. She turned around, just as Billy reached the landing. Deciding to ignore him, Alice carried on with what she was doing and pushed the pillowcases she had just folded onto the shelf. She wasn't quite tall enough, and they fell down.
"You look like you need some help there,"
said Billy, openly admiring Alice's legs. "No, I'm fine. I'll get a chair." The last thing she wanted was help from that slimy git.
"No need."
Billy was next to her. He slipped his hand around her back, resting it on her waist as he guided her out of the way. Alice wanted to vomit at the mere sensation of his touch.
"There, that was easy. Pass me the others."
Reluctantly, Alice obliged. "Thank you." It was a begrudging thanks on her part. She wished he'd just clear off. The music was still playing downstairs, but it didn't give Alice the same feeling of enjoyment anymore. Billy put the last of the pillowcases on the shelf.
"What's that?"
he said. "What?" Alice wondered if he'd found something in the airing cupboard.
"That thing on your hand, on your finger."
Alice had forgotten all about the ring Paolo had given her. Automatically, she covered her right hand with her left. "Just a ring?" It angered her that she had felt the need to hide it. Somehow, it felt disloyal to Paolo, but at the same time, she didn't want Billy to see it.
"Show me. You haven't had a ring on before."
He tapped his cane on the wooden floorboards.
"Show me."
Alice held out her hand, which Billy grabbed.
"Where did you get that from?"
he demanded. "Oh, I found it." Alice knew better than to say it was from Paolo. "It was in the field."
"Liar."
Billy hooked his cane onto his arm and grabbed hold of Alice's wrist. Before she realised what he was doing, he had yanked the ring from her finger. "That's mine! You can't do that!" she cried.
"Actually, I can. This was made by a POW from a British coin. That would be classed as theft, which is punishable by imprisonment, or even death. I need to confiscate that and turn it into the authorities."
Alice had no idea if Billy was telling the truth or not. "You can't prove any of that."
"No, but I can take measures to ensure this sort of thing does not happen again. Anyway, why are you so upset if you just found it, as you claim? You don't want me to start accusing anyone, do you?"
Alice wanted to think it was an empty threat, but she knew better than to put it to the test where Billy was concerned. She gave a nonchalant shrug. "Keep it if you want. Doesn't make any odds to me. Like I said, I just found it in the field." The sound of Cook ringing out the dinner bell brought the confrontation to a halt. When they were all sitting at the table, with Paolo opposite her, Alice saw him glance towards her hand.
"Now, look what Alice found in the field this afternoon," said Billy.
He placed the penny ring on the table in front of him. Alice forced herself not to look at Paolo.
"Old piece of junk jewellery,"
Billy carried on.
"You know, I was going to turn it into the authorities on the premise of theft, but for now, I think I'll hold on to it, even though, as Alice so rightly said, it's a worthless piece of tat."
Billy returned to his meal, leaving the ring in full view, as if taunting her and Paolo. At the end of the meal, when Billy reached over and picked up the ring, Alice had to tamp down the desire to stab his rotten hand with her fork. She resolved herself to thinking of all the horrible things she'd like to do to Billy. When she got the chance, she'd have to explain to Paolo how Billy had ended up with the ring. She hoped he'd understand. It was about an hour after dinner, when Alice was in her room with Lily, that they heard a commotion from the attic room above them. It was angry shouting, all in Italian. "That's Paolo and Carlo," said Lily, sitting up and dropping the book she was reading onto the blanket. "Whatever's going on? They're going to have the whole house up here in a minute." "They don't sound very happy," said Alice needlessly. Next, there was the thundering of feet on the floorboards, followed by a more heated exchange of words. The footsteps, or rather foot thumps, were stomping around before Alice heard the door being flung open and hitting the wall. "That doesn't sound good," said Lily. "They're coming downstairs now." The distinctive sound of boots on bare treads grew louder as whoever it was made their way down. Alice and Lily jumped up and went to the door, opening it a fraction. The door to the attic staircase flew open, and Paolo stormed out with his bedsheets in his hand. "Paolo!" called Alice in alarm, but he didn't appear to hear her. He was already going down the main staircase. A couple of seconds later, Carlo appeared on the landing. "What's happened?" asked Lily. Carlo looked down the staircase and back to Lily. He took a deep breath.
"Someone has pissed on Paolo's bed."
Under any other circumstances, it would have been laughable to hear an Italian use British swear words, but it was clearly not funny at that moment. "Someone did what?" Alice could barely believe her ears.
"His bed has piss all over it," said Carlo. "He is going to wash it now, but it will not be dry and his mattress stinks."
"Oh my God, that's terrible. Who did that?" As soon as she asked, Alice knew it was a ridiculous question. Still, Carlo took the trouble to make it clear.
"It was not me, and it was not Paolo. I do not think it was any of you ladies."
Alice was seething. She could feel the anger bubbling up inside her. "This is because of the ring. It's my fault. I should have taken it off. I'm going to help Paolo."
"No, do not help him. He will be—"
Carlo searched for the word.
"Ashamed."
"But—" began Alice. Lily put her hand on Alice's arm. "He's right. Leave Paolo tonight. Speak to him in the morning." "At least let me give you clean sheets," said Alice, going down the hallway and opening the airing cupboard door. She fished out the best bedsheet and top sheet she could find. Sod what anyone would say. Paolo didn't deserve that kind of humiliation. "Here's a clean flannel. Wait there while I fetch some white vinegar to clean the mattress with. You can turn it over tonight, and in the morning, stand it up with the windows open to dry it." Alice went downstairs to the kitchen. The door to the scullery was half open, and she could see Paolo standing over the enamel sink, scrubbing at his bedsheet. He must have sensed her looking and turned around. There was a mix of anger and sadness in his eyes. Alice went to say something, but Paolo reached out to push the door, pausing for a moment.
"It is not you, Alice,"
he said, before closing the door. Alice felt the burn of tears in her eyes as she grabbed the white vinegar from the cupboard under the sink. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she was going to make Billy pay for what he had done. One way or another, she'd get revenge on him for humiliating dear, sweet Paolo like that. Billy was nothing but a disgusting pig.
10th of June, 1945. Carissime Mamma e Sofia, I received your most recent letter, and I am glad you are well enough, even though it is so difficult for you to find enough food. There is still no news when I can come home, although, I must admit, I will be sad to leave Alice. We have become very good friends in recent weeks, and I enjoy her company very much. She is to have a baby soon, and will be passing it up for adoption. I cannot imagine having to make that decision. It is very cruel. I wish there was something I could do to help, but I have no idea what, even if I could. We had a terrible storm. A tree came through the roof of the chapel and smashed the stained glass window. Half of the wall was smashed, too. We are in the middle of rebuilding it, and I have been asked to make a new stained glass window. There is not much to say. Life on the farm goes on, and nothing much has changed since the end of the war. Billy continues to be his usual loathsome self. In fact, he has been particularly bad since Germany surrendered. He sometimes comes up to our rooms at night when he has had a drink and taunts us. He calls us names and tries to provoke us, but we are not as stupid as he thinks. He will get his comeuppance sooner or later, and if I am there to witness it, then it shall be a very sweet moment. But don't worry, I'm not going to do anything rash. I am a patient man, perhaps more so than you remember, and I shall bide my time. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 31. Nate, 2022. Nate wasn't quite sure what had happened between him and Rhoda at her flat the previous day, but whatever it was, he had been left with a sense of closeness. It was as if he struggled to think of the right word, but settled on friendship. It was as if their friendship was on the verge of being something more, teetering at some sort of tipping point, not knowing whether to fall back or rush forwards. He liked Rhoda, liked her a lot, and he wanted to get to know her better, but wasn't entirely sure now was the perfect moment, if indeed there was such a thing. He didn't want to scare her off by coming on too strong and too fast, but he didn't want to be so laid back that she didn't think he was interested. Damn, when did dating get so convoluted? It was so much easier when you were younger and didn't have any complications. Rhoda was complicated. He was fully aware of that, and therefore it was essential to get this just right. Nate leaned back in his chair. He'd been in the office since 7:30, hunched over a pile of accounts in a bid to clear his desk so he was free for the weekend. He stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders. What he really needed was fresh air and a bit of exercise. He'd take a walk to grab some lunch from the deli on the high street. It was a really nice day now he was out. The weather had been so unsettled recently for the time of year. It was nice not to have to wear his jacket. He popped his sunglasses on and was soon waiting in the queue outside the deli. It was only a small place, takeaway only, and once you had 2 customers inside, it was full. He was flicking absently through his phone when the sound of a car horn made him look up. A silver Fiesta had cut up a black BMW. There was a minor exchange of hand gestures and another blare of the horn before the Fiesta shot off. The BMW pulled in on the other side of the road, and as Nate moved along in the queue, he gave the vehicle another glance. To his surprise, he saw Vince Taylor getting out, except this Vince Taylor looked decidedly younger than before. Nate took a closer look, just to be sure he wasn't mistaken, but the Romanesque side profile convinced him it was the same man who had been to see Rhoda at the chapel. His blonde hair wasn't scraped back on his head today, and he wasn't wearing the thick-rimmed glasses he had previously donned. Most surprisingly, the local historian was very steady on his feet, capable even, with no need for a walking stick. Nate watched the man open the rear door and pull out the stick, but instead of leaning on it, as he had done when he'd visited the chapel, he merely held it in his hand and strode around the back of the car to the pavement, where he then marched into the local council offices. Well, there certainly wasn't anything wrong with his legs. Vince Taylor looked at least 10 years younger. Why on earth would he feign frailty? Did he think it would curry more favour with Rhoda if he went for the sympathy vote? As Nate ordered his sandwich and made his way back to the office, he continued to brood over what he'd just witnessed. The more he thought about it, the more it bothered him. By the time he'd reached his office, he'd made up his mind what he was going to do. He dropped the sandwich bag onto his desk as he sat down, and then took his phone from his pocket and called his ex-wife. "Nate, is everything all right?" Siobhan asked immediately.
"Yes, everything is fine."
Nate hesitated, reminding himself this wasn't for his benefit, and swallowing a bit of pride was in order.
"I need a favour."
"A favour?"
"Yeah, I wondered if Harrison would do a background check on someone for me, please."
Siobhan gave a laugh. "A background check? You can't just ring up and order a check on someone."
"It's important,"
insisted Nate.
"There's some bloke snooping around at my dad's, and I don't 100% trust him."
He was aware he had made it sound more sinister than it was on the face of it. "And you want Harrison to put his job on the line just because you don't like someone? Do you realise what you're asking?"
"I know. Can you just ask him, though?"
"No, I won't," Siobhan replied. He could hear Harrison's voice in the background as a quick exchange between husband and wife took place, before Harrison came to the phone.
"Nate, what's the problem? Siobhan said you've got someone hanging about at your dad's." "More or less. I just want to make sure he's genuine."
Nate took a breath and gave his former best friend a rundown on the miraculous recovery Vince Taylor appeared to have made.
"Text me his details," said Harrison. "If you can get his car reg too, that would help. I'll see what I can do. Thanks."
Nate just managed to stop himself from adding mate. It had been a long time since either of them had used that term to the other. By mid-afternoon, Nate knew he would end up working late for the second day running. It was all right taking time off when he liked, but he knew he'd have to pay for it later. Sure, he could have one of the junior accountants to undertake some of the mundane work, but it didn't sit easy with him. Delegating was one thing, but palming your work off on another member of staff because you were behind wasn't on. It wasn't the sort of ethos he liked to encourage at work. Nate was a great believer in never asking his employees to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Damn it, he hated having morals sometimes. It didn't help that the client he was currently preparing end-of-year accounts for was hopeless at paperwork and refused to move over to digital uploading of the finances and linking his banking automatically through the electronic systems his firm provided. It was like going back to the dark ages with physical paperwork and wading through it all to marry up invoices and receipts. Nate was glad of the excuse to stop work when his phone rang. He picked it up and looked at the screen. Rhoda Sullivan. That cheered him up. He answered the phone on the second ring, leaning back in his leather chair.
"Hi, Rhoda. How's it going? Everything okay?"
He'd already made up his mind he wouldn't mention seeing Vince just yet. He'd wait to see what Harrison came back with. Rhoda had enough on her plate without him adding to it. "Nate." He could tell instantly by the tone of her voice that she was anything but okay. He sat upright.
"What's up?"
He listened while Rhoda filled him in on what had happened with the scaffolding.
"And you had a threatening phone call?"
He didn't like the sound of this. "Yep. Couldn't tell if it was male or female. It was too low and whispery. You know, like someone who's been a heavy smoker all their life," replied Rhoda.
"Bloody hell. Are you okay? Really okay?"
"Shaken up, if I'm honest, but in one piece. As for the call, I've had nicer ones."
"You should go to the police."
"And say what?"
"Show them the note and tell them about this call. They might be able to trace it."
"Unknown number. And if the caller had any sense, they would have made it from one of those £10 throwaway phones that are untraceable."
"But the guardrail collapsing."
Nate was on his feet, looking out of his office window.
"That's basically sabotage. And your car window, all that coupled with the break-in at your flat. It needs reporting."
I don't think they will be able to do anything. They can't prove the scaffolding was sabotaged. The scaffolding guys are here now, and they are so apologetic. I don't want them to get into trouble for something they haven't done.
I still think we should report it, just for the record.
You can.
For fuck's sake, Rhoda.
Nate regretted his frustrated outburst instantly. He could feel Rhoda bristle on the other end of the line. She went to say something, a reprimand, no doubt, but he spoke over her.
I'm sorry, I just don't want you to get hurt.
There was a moment's silence on the phone before Rhoda spoke. I don't either, as it happens. Thank you for your concern.
Look, I'm going to wrap things up here at the office and come over.
Oh, Nate, there's really no need. I'm fine, honest. Plus, you've got a heap of work to do. Nate glared at the files on his desk with intense annoyance.
Okay, but I'm going to call the police. They probably won't even want to come out, but at least I'll have reported it. I'll come over later this evening once I've finished work. How does that sound?
It sounds like a compromise.
It is, for both of us.
He exhaled slowly.
Are you off back to Sussex today?
I was debating whether to bother. I wouldn't mind staying, but I don't want to get in your dad's way.
He won't mind at all. Stay the weekend. You could even have a day off, and I could show you around the area.
Nate realised he sounded far more enthusiastic than he should, and tried to tone his voice down.
Well, that's if you want to, of course. If you want to get on with the work at the chapel, then don't let me get in the way.
He really needed to shut up. He was babbling like a fool. Sure, a bit of sightseeing would be nice. There was a touch of amusement in her voice.
Oh, that will be great. I mean, yeah, good.
He cringed at his ineptitude at trying to sound casual and at Rhoda's obvious entertainment. Look forward to seeing you later. Bye.
Bye.
Nate looked at his phone for a long moment. Rhoda had said she was looking forward to seeing him. Why did that idea make his stomach feel warm and glowing? It was a casual remark, wasn't it? He made the call to the police, and as Rhoda had predicted, they didn't seem that interested. The civilian who took the call said they'd get DS Shepherd to call Nate back, but added that he was off duty until Monday. Nate had no choice but to agree to wait. He'd only just settled back down to his work when he received a text message. It was from Rhoda. Does your Aunt Aggie have a carer come to her in the mornings? Nate frowned at the somewhat left-field question. He tapped back a reply.
You must be joking. She's worse than my dad for being independent. Why?
He waited for a reply, but after 20 minutes of silence from his phone, he assumed he wasn't getting one. He'd ask her later. He really needed to get on. Nate ploughed on through his work that day, eating at his desk and getting the receptionist to shield his calls and take messages for him. Usually, he liked to have his work up to date by Friday, so he could head into the weekend without the thought of anything urgent hanging over his head. He didn't have Isaac with him this weekend. Siobhan was taking him up to London to visit her mother. Usually, when Isaac wasn't about, Nate's weekends felt empty and insignificant, but he certainly had that Friday feeling. As it turned out, he was the last to leave the office that night, but he did so with a clear desk. Nate flicked off his office light, leaving the main light on in reception, before setting the security alarms and locking up the offices. He rented office space in a larger building from where a firm of solicitors, a call centre, and an insurance company also worked. It was a sure sign it was Friday. His was the only car left in the underground car park. Nate headed for his Alfa Romeo across the parking bays, his footsteps echoing against the concrete. His phone buzzed a text message in his pocket. As he went to fish it out, he heard the rev of an engine, but it took a few seconds for him to register the vehicle was heading in his direction at an alarming and increasing speed. He looked towards the sound of the car. The headlights dazzled him, and he put his arm up to shield his eyes. Surely they'd seen him. He was right in their path, for God's sake. The engine revved louder. Nate swore and dived out of the way just in the nick of time. He could feel the rush of air as the car whizzed past him. He rolled over, in a rather inept James Bond fashion, and tried to get a look at the number plate, but the soft amber lighting of the car park made it impossible. The car reached the end of the strip and made a U-turn, its tyres squealing on the concrete floor. Nate jumped to his feet. For a moment, he stood there, as if they were about to duel, but the car revved several times and accelerated hard towards him. Nate wasn't taking any chances. He sprinted towards his own car. His initial instinct was to take cover behind it, but then it occurred to him if the other car rammed his, he would be squashed against the wall. Instead, he kept himself flat against the driver's door, looking over the roof, ready to make a sudden escape at the last second if he needed to. The car tore down the centre of the car park, its horn blaring out. Nate fumbled for his phone, hoping to grab a picture of the car, but his phone wasn't in his pocket. It was too late anyway. The car had disappeared up the ramp and out into the street. It was then that he noticed his phone, or what was left of it, in the middle of the car park. With rather shaky legs, he retrieved the device. The screen was smashed and the back was cracked. It was dead. Better the phone was dead than him. In the safety of his car, Nate took a deep breath as he rested his head back and closed his eyes. What the hell had just happened? Chapter 32. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda had decided not to make a big deal of the scaffolding to Jack. She didn't want to worry him, but as it happened, by the time she had gone back down to the farm for lunch, he knew all about it. "The scaffolders told me," he said, as Rhoda sat at the kitchen table. "You were bloody lucky. Those idiots should be sacked." "It was just an accident," said Rhoda, playing it down. "I'm all right, and they've fixed it and been around the whole tower double-checking everything." Jack had muttered to himself some more about how useless they were, but had let the matter drop, for which Rhoda was grateful. She didn't want to tell him about the phone call. It was unnecessary. Instead, she had moved the conversation on to housing for him. He had been characteristically reluctant to commit to even phoning the council. In the end, he had left her to take Tink for a walk. Now it was early evening, and Rhoda was clock-watching, waiting for Nate to arrive. She had found herself thinking about him often that afternoon, and she didn't really know why. It was almost as if she was missing him. How ludicrous was that? She'd keep that thought well and truly to herself. The house phone burst into life, making Rhoda jump. Bloody thing. It would be the death of her at this rate. Jack answered it, but he was obviously doing a lot of listening, just interjecting with a few grunts here and there, before finally finishing with, "Okay, I'll tell her. Bye." Rhoda looked up as he replaced the receiver. "That was Nate," he said. "He's going to phone you himself, or text you, or whatever it is. He's gone straight home tonight, got some work to do. He'll explain anyway. He's got a temporary phone or something, so expect a different number," he said. "Oh, okay." Rhoda looked back at her laptop, hoping she was disguising the distinct feeling of disappointment that had pitched up at this news. "He works too hard," commented Jack. "Mind you, darn sight easier than working the farm." Rhoda closed the lid to her laptop. "I know he didn't take on the farm as you wanted, but he does feel guilty about it." Jack nodded. "I know he does. He shouldn't. I was disappointed for a long time, but with all this compulsory purchase order, I'm glad he didn't. He'd be stuck now, with no job to fall back on. Besides, he's made a much better living as an accountant than he could ever have expected running the farm." "You should be proud of him." Jack eyed her for a moment. "I am. Very proud." "Maybe you should tell Nate that. He'd appreciate it." "Probably should. Just in case I snuff it before I get the chance." Jack gave her a wink. Although Jack was making light of it, Rhoda was sure he was serious. "You don't want to regret not saying things, just in case." Jack shifted in his chair. Nate told me about your brother. I'm sorry.
Thanks. I haven't given up on him, though, and I hope I'll get the chance to tell him all the things I should have when we were younger. Rhoda's phone buzzed with a text message.
Hi, it's Nate. This is my new number. Phone's buggered. Can I give you a call in a minute? When my dad's not about. Also had to pick up Isaac for the night. His trip to his grandmother's been cancelled as she's not well. Might have a third wheel sightseeing tomorrow, or we can do it another day.
Rhoda messaged straight back. Hey, don't worry. More than happy to spend the day with 2 Hartwells. Entirely up to you, though. She liked that Nate put his son first. It was how it should be. Besides, she liked Isaac. She recognised a lot of herself in him. The loner, the kid who was a bit different, the kid who struggled to fit in. She could relate to all that. Nate replied.
Great. 2 for the price of 1 it is.
Rhoda sent a final text saying she was looking forward to it, and she really was. It would be nice to do something different, and even nicer was the company.
All sorted?
Asked Jack, as she put her phone back on the arm of the sofa. Yes, I'm being taken out by Nate and Isaac tomorrow. Then a thought struck her. Why don't you come? Jack chuckled.
Now that's being greedy. 3 of us.
It would be nice.
I'm supposed to be going to Aggie's for lunch tomorrow.
That's nice. Does she cook?
No, we get fish and chips. OAP special on a Saturday lunchtime.
Jack rose from his chair.
Anyway, I'm going to take Tink for a quick walk around the garden, and then I'm off to my bed. Good night, Rhoda.
Rhoda went back to her laptop. She was trying to find out what had happened to Paolo Sartori and had filled out a form for the Italian military website. But with very little information to input, she wasn't holding out much hope of a reply. She heard Jack come in from his walk a short while later, and he called out another good night as he passed the living room door. Rhoda was itching to find out what was in the box he'd locked away in the cupboard, but she needed to make certain he was in bed and asleep this time. She didn't need any more surprises on a darkened staircase. She allowed an hour to pass and was just about to get up from the sofa to look for the key when her phone rang. She grabbed it quickly to avoid it disturbing Jack. Hello?
Hey, it's me. Sorry to ring so late.
It was Nate on the other end of the line. That's okay. What's up?
Nothing. Just wanted to tell you something that I might not get the chance to tomorrow with Isaac about.
Rhoda sat back on the sofa. I'm all ears.
I had a bit of a fright this evening.
Rhoda listened as Nate explained the incident with the car in the underground car park. Oh my God, Nate. Are you all right? Rhoda sat forward on her seat.
Yeah, I'm fine. A bit shaken, but that's all.
And you've no idea who it was or why they did it?
I don't think it was a disgruntled client,
replied Nate dryly.
Would like to say it was kids messing about, but it was a 4-wheel drive type of car. Didn't get a proper look at it, just that it was black or dark blue.
Are you going to report it?
Isn't that my line?
He gave a laugh to diffuse the situation, but Rhoda wasn't being fobbed off that easily. Maybe you should, especially in light of the scaffolding incident.
Probably should.
Do you think they're related? She could hear Nate blow out a breath before he spoke.
Could be, or it could be a coincidence.
I wasn't going to say anything to your dad, but the scaffolders let slip about the guardrail. I just played it down. Didn't want to worry him.
Thanks, appreciate that,
replied Nate.
He gave me that list you provided him with, with the housing people.
That's good. I thought he might throw it on the fire along with the... Rhoda stopped in mid-sentence. She hadn't meant to blurt that out.
Along with what?
Asked Nate slowly. I haven't had a chance to tell you yet. She glanced towards the door, which was closed, and lowered her voice. I came down for a glass of water last night, and your dad was burning some papers.
He's always burning something, said Nate. Doesn't believe in shredding anything.
Rhoda hesitated, mulling over her choice of words, but ultimately deciding just to say it straight. They were the missing ledger envelopes from upstairs. What? Are you sure? How do you know? Not everything burned.
I found some bits in the fireplace. I took some pictures. I'll send them to you."
I don't know what to make of that,
confessed Nate.
Why would he be burning the ledgers, and what's he doing with them anyway?
He obviously doesn't want us to find something out.
Like what work was carried out at the chapel?
Rhoda could hear the confusion in Nate's voice. He must know something. I'm really sorry, Nate, but that can be the only reason.
I don't get it.
There was a long silence before Nate spoke again.
Look, do me a favour, Rhoda. Don't say anything to anyone yet. I need time to think about it all. I should speak to Dad, really. There might be a perfectly reasonable explanation.
Of course. Rhoda eyed the cupboard on the other side of the room. She didn't want to add to Nate's distress by mentioning the box. There might, after all, be nothing in there. She'd look first, and only tell him if she found anything useful. In the background, Rhoda could hear a voice saying something to Nate.
"Sorry, I've got to go," said Nate. "Isaac's up. See you in the morning, about 11 o'clock, after Isaac's swimming lesson."
"Sure. Night." Rhoda sat there for several minutes, deliberating about looking in the box. It had seemed like a really good idea until now. Was she going to unleash a heap of pain onto Nate if she did? Would she be throwing suspicion on Jack? How would she feel if at any time someone out there had found Dean's remains? She winced at the thought, and they decided not to do anything about it. Rhoda acknowledged that at this point in time, all she wanted to know was if he was alive and safe, or if he was dead. She needed to move out of this state of limbo. It wasn't a healthy place to be. With that overriding thought, she knew she had to push on with trying to find out who the man was who had been buried in the chapel. It wasn't about upsetting Nate. Sure, that came into it, but it wasn't the basis of all decisions. The body in the chapel deserved to be acknowledged, their identity known, their family informed, and, possibly, the victim given a proper burial. With a newfound sense of purpose, Rhoda went over to the cabinet, and, stretching on tiptoe, she was able to reach the vase at the top. She could hear the key tinkle inside it as she brought the vase down. She tipped the key into her hand. "Right, let's see what Jack is hiding," she whispered. The box wasn't as heavy as she'd imagined, and she lifted it out onto the floor before removing the lid. There were several bottle green folders, the type that usually hung in a filing cabinet. Inside were papers which, as far as Rhoda could tell, were bills and invoices for the farm. Each hanging file was labelled with a year. These dated back to the 1970s. Nate had been right when he said his dad wasn't such a meticulous record keeper as Louise Hartwell had been. Rhoda lifted the files out, giving the contents a quick flick through as she did, to make sure it wasn't anything important. The last folder had a brown A4 envelope inside. Rhoda's pulse rate quickened for no particular reason, other than she sensed she had found something important. As she took the folder out, underneath that, she saw something that made her gasp. A dark green leather-bound book with gold lettering embossed on the cover. Holy Bible, Hartwell Family. Rhoda pulled the Bible out and, with shaking hands, opened the front cover. Inside, as Nate had said, was a list of names and dates stretching back to 1901. She took a moment to absorb the fact that this book had been handed down through the Hartwell family for all those years. The ink was black and a little faded, but still clearly legible. She swept her hand across the page, imagining all Nate's ancestors who had held this Bible and written the births, marriages, and deaths of family members inside the cover. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 11, jolting Rhoda from her thoughts, reminding her of what she was looking for. She ran her finger down the page until she got to the mid-1930s, where it showed the marriage of George Hartwell to Louise Charlotte Morris in 1933. They must have been Jack's parents. Louise Morris had become Louise Hartwell when she married. Rhoda moved down to the next line. John Charles Hartwell, born 1936. Rhoda knew from the museum's paperwork on the sale of the chapel that Jack's real name was John, the name Jack being a common nickname for the latter, so that was obviously his birth recorded in the Bible. After that, the records had stopped. No other names were listed. Rhoda wondered why Jack's wife hadn't carried on the tradition. It troubled her far more than it should that Nate wasn't mentioned. It was almost as if he didn't exist. There was no entry for Louise Hartwell's death, either, or for Jack's father's death. The page looked unfinished and forgotten, an incomplete family history. Carefully, Rhoda repacked the box, ensuring all the documents went back in the same order she'd found them, before returning the box to the cupboard and locking it up. She dropped the key back into the vase. Rhoda couldn't help thinking of Dean. Would his life only be marked by his birth and never his death? Would she be forever in this state of limbo, like the unfinished records in the Bible? She wasn't sure she could carry on like this, always wondering, always hoping, never knowing. Perhaps she needed to accept she'd just never know what had happened to her brother. The idea pained her, but she also acknowledged the pain that always looking for him had brought her. Which was the lesser of the two evils? She thought of Nate, and for the first time she realised she might have some sort of future beyond Dean's disappearance. She just had to be brave enough to cross that line. Chapter 33. Alice, 1945. The morning after the awful incident of Billy urinating on Paolo's bed, Paolo was very quiet at the breakfast table. Alice could sense the tension in his body the moment he walked into the room. Billy was sitting at the head of the table and bade Paolo a cheery good morning.
"Did you sleep well?"
he asked, clearly enjoying himself. Paolo chose not to answer, and Alice spoke to avoid an awkward silence. "Glad we didn't have any rain last night. I think the weather is going to be nice today." It was a banal conversation, but it was better than listening to Billy bait Paolo. "Oh, yes, let's hope so," said Mrs. Hartwell. "I've got a long journey ahead of me today." Mrs. Hartwell was going to spend a few days with her sister, Mrs. Armitage, and was travelling by train that morning. She'd already asked Alice if she wanted to write her father a letter, but after consideration, Alice had decided against it. What was there to say, really? He certainly wouldn't want to hear about her pregnancy, or anything to do with it. "Can you just pass on my regards and tell him I was asking after him?" she'd said instead. Mrs. Hartwell was now questioning Paolo about the repairs to the window. This was a subject he was usually only too happy to talk about, but even this didn't lighten his mood, or elicit any more than the bare minimum of words from him. If Mrs. Hartwell noticed, she didn't say anything. She was suitably encouraging and grateful for the hard work Paolo was putting into fixing the window. "Now, do let me know if you need any more materials," she said. "I know they're a bit hard to come by at the moment, but not impossible."
"I have everything I need," replied Paolo. "Thank you." "I should bloody well hope so," snipped Billy. "Costs us enough money as it is."
"It will be worth it," said Mrs. Hartwell. "Now, everyone, I must love you and leave you. Billy, can you get the car ready? I'll be needing to leave in 30 minutes. I'd like Paolo to drive me to the station."
"What?"
Billy put down his fork.
"He can't drive you. That's ridiculous."
"He most certainly can if I ask him to," replied Mrs. Hartwell.
"He needs a chaperone if he leaves the farm."
"Then he will have one. Alice, be a dear and come along in the car with me this morning and chaperone Paolo back." Alice had to stop herself from grinning. "Yes, of course," she replied. Ha! That would put a stop to Billy's gallop. "Now, don't argue," Mrs. Hartwell said firmly to Billy. "I've made up my mind. I want you here to take the vicar up to the chapel. He's going to bless it for me." And then she added, "You might get him to bless you at the same time." Alice had to stop herself from laughing out loud at that one. Billy didn't disguise his feelings, though. Huffing and puffing, muttering under his breath about the bloody vicar and the bloody chapel.
He pushed his chair back and left the room with as much strop as he could muster. Alice sat in the back of the car alongside Mrs. Hartwell as Paolo expertly drove them to the station to catch the 9:30 to London, where Mrs. Hartwell was changing trains for her second leg of the journey to the Suffolk countryside. "Now, Alice, I'll be back at the end of the week," she explained. "On Friday, we have the Eggers coming to see you." Again. They were nice people, but Alice really didn't want to see them. It was a harsh reminder of why she was at Telton Hall and what she'd have to give up in a few months' time. She just couldn't bear thinking about it. "Well, they couldn't come last time because of the storm, so they asked to come on Friday. I couldn't very well say no. Besides, we don't want to put them off now, do we?" Alice forced herself to agree with Mrs. Hartwell. She gazed out of the window, not taking in the scenery, but instead imagining life beyond her due date without her baby. She knew she'd spend the rest of her life wondering about her child and what had happened to them, how their life was working out. She knew that every year on her child's birthday she would think of them. Not that she wouldn't be thinking of them every day for the rest of her life, but she knew the birthdays would be poignant and difficult. And what about the child? Would they ever wonder about their real mother? Or would they think badly of her for giving them up? She'd probably never know, and not knowing would torture her every single day. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, turning in her seat to look at the older woman. "Will I be able to leave a letter for the baby? For when it's older?" "A letter? Saying what?" "Saying I'm sorry." Alice swallowed a lump that had appeared in her throat. "Explaining I had no choice." Mrs. Hartwell gave Alice a sympathetic smile. "We can certainly ask the Eggers if that's possible." "What if they say no?" The fear was clawing at her heart and punching her stomach. "How will the child ever know?" "Don't upset yourself now, dear. It's for the best the child's life is as uncomplicated as possible." Alice felt a tear spill from her eye. She swiped it away. "What if the child wants to find me? How will they know where I am?" "Not all children want to find their real mothers," said Mrs. Hartwell. "I don't mean to upset you, but it's best if I'm honest. Some of them are very happy with their adoptive parents, but if they ever did wonder about their real mothers, they would only need to contact me. Of course, it's all done legally, so the child may wish to contact the authorities who might be able to help them. I keep a record of the mothers who come to stay with me, along with details of their child and details of who adopted them. It's unofficial, but I like to create a social history that will be here long after I'm gone." More tears fell from Alice's eyes. "And have many children come back to find their real mothers?" "I can't answer that, I'm afraid. I've only been doing this for the past few years, since my husband died. So, you see, none of the children are old enough to know or to find out yet." Alice sat back in her seat, trying to make sense of the morass of emotions that was spinning around and around inside her. Having dropped Mrs. Hartwell off at the station, Alice was in the front seat next to Paolo as they drove back towards Telton. "I'm sorry about the ring," she said. "I forgot to take it off and Billy saw it. He practically yanked it from my hand. I'm sure he would happily have cut my finger off to get it." "I understand. Do not worry. I will make you a new one." "No, don't. If he finds it, he'll report you for theft of the coin." Paolo frowned. "I do not think that is a crime." "I don't know, but I don't want to put it to the test." Alice put her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. It was nice, just the two of them being somewhere different on their own. Alice tried to push away thoughts of the fate of her baby, as she imagined what it would be like if there had been no war and Paolo wasn't a POW. Instead of lifting her spirits, it only served to dampen them. "You look sad," commented Paolo. "What is wrong?" So much for trying to pretend she was anything but all right. She sat up and opened her eyes. "I'm scared," she said finally. Paolo pulled the car over to the side of the road and twisted around so he was facing her. one hand across the back of her seat.
Scared?
I'm scared I'm going to regret giving up the baby, admitted Alice. I'm scared I'll never know what happens to it. I'm scared the Eggers won't look after the baby properly. An unexpected sob escaped her throat. Paolo pulled her towards him, holding her with both arms around her, his chin resting gently on top of her head. Alice cried her heart out. All the pent-up emotion came pouring out at once. She clung to Paolo as if he were a lifebelt, and she were being tossed around in a Force 9 gale in the middle of the ocean. She didn't want to ever let him go.
It's all right,
comforted Paolo after a while.
Cry. It is good for the soul sometimes.
Alice was unaware of time and felt she'd sobbed for an age. Finally, she pulled away from Paolo, her breath still catching as the tears subsided. Paolo passed her a handkerchief, and she blew her nose.
I'm sorry. Do not apologize.
He brushed away a strand of hair from the side of her face.
Is there no other answer?
I can't keep the baby. How can I? A single mother? It would be different if I had been married before Brett died. A widow would be all right, but a single mother is different. I think I could withstand it, but the stigma attached to the baby as it grew up would be unbearable. She wiped her nose again. It's not just that. It's the practical side. How can I ever hope to give the child all the things it deserves in life? I would be penniless.
You could give the child love. There is nothing more important for a child than the love of their parents.
But love doesn't buy shoes for their feet, clothes for their back, or put food on the table. The words came out more harshly than she meant them to, and she saw the look of hurt flit across Paolo's face. Sorry, I'm not cross at you. I'm cross at myself for not being able to provide the basic things a child needs. Paolo stroked her face.
I understand. I wish I could offer you some hope or an answer.
It's not your problem, but thank you. It's kind of you to be so concerned. Alice took a deep, steadying breath. We'd better get back. I dare say Billy is clock watching, and if we're late, it will just give him something else to moan about. When they arrived back at Telton Hall, after putting the car away in the garage, Paolo went up to the chapel and Alice went to the kitchen. Lily was peeling potatoes, and Cook was kneading dough. Alice could see from the look on Lily's face something was wrong, but she gave a small shake of her head, and Alice knew not to ask.
Ah, there you are, said Cook. Mrs. H get off all right, did she?
Yes, no problems. Can I do anything to help?
Can you just see where Jack and Aggie are? Asked Cook. I haven't seen them all morning, and I want Jack to get some elderflower so I can make a cordial. Whilst you're at it, can you collect the eggs too? Alice did a quick search of the house before heading out into the garden. With still no sign of the youngsters, she widened her search to the outbuildings. As she was just about to open the gate at the rear of the kitchen garden, it swung open and Paolo stormed through. His face was contorted with rage. His hand was gripping a piece of stained glass.
Paolo, whatever's wrong?
Mind out of my way, Alice.
Not until you tell me what's happened. There was no way she was going to let Paolo march into the house. He clearly wasn't in control of his temper. She put both hands on his chest to physically stop him. Tell me, what's happened? Paolo breathed heavily through his nose as his jaw clenched. Finally, he was composed enough to speak.
The window at the chapel has been broken. On purpose. Someone has smashed the glass I made.
Oh, no. You're sure it was on purpose? Could it have fallen? Alice's mind raced through the possibilities.
It is all in place on the table as I set it out, but someone has broken 5 pieces of glass. They are all cracked. It has not fallen on the floor, and nothing has fallen from above. The hammer was placed on the glass as a sign to show it was done on purpose.
Who did it? Alice was sure she didn't really need to ask.
Who do you think?
Paolo went to sidestep her, but Alice stood firm.
I don't know what you're going to do, but whatever it is, you mustn't. You can't go accusing him. He will only deny it.
He's trying to get you to do something stupid so he can have you arrested or sent back to the camp. You must not play his game. Do you hear me?" She gripped the tops of his arms and felt the muscles contract. "I do not care." "I do. I care very much." She looked him straight in the eye. "I don't want anything to happen to you. Please, don't do this. Please. I couldn't bear being here without you." Alice surprised herself with the emotion in her voice. She hadn't even realised up until that point that she felt so strongly about Paolo, but now she'd made it clear to both of them. He looked down at her, and she could feel the tension lessen in his biceps. "You mean that?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded an understanding, and the rage in his face dissolved. "I will go and find Carlo. We start again on the glass." The sound of the gate opening behind Paolo made them both look around. "Oh, Jack, Aggie," said Alice. "I've just been looking for you. Glad you've appeared. That saves me hunting around in the barns and stables." The two youngsters exchanged a furtive look. Jack's gaze immediately went to his feet, while Aggie stood taller and jutted out her chin. "We were up at the chapel, weren't we, Jack?"
"Yeah,"
mumbled Jack.
"The chapel?"
Paolo looked confused.
"I was there, but I did not see you."
"We went to the woods after," said Aggie quickly. She gave Jack a nudge.
"Yeah, the woods."
Alice looked suspiciously from one child to the other. "Did you see anything at the chapel? Was anyone else in there?" "We didn't go in," said Aggie quickly. "Just went to look at the fallen tree. Anyway, why did you want us?" "Cook's looking for you," said Alice. "She wants you to pick some elderflower." "All right, come on, Jack, let's go." Aggie took hold of Jack's wrist and trailed him past Paolo and Alice as she hurried down the path and into the kitchen.
"Before you say anything," said Paolo. "No, I do not believe either of them would damage the glass. Jack has been interested in what I am doing. Neither of them would do it."
"I know. That only leaves one person, and he would definitely do it."
"Exactly. Now, I must go and find Carlo."
"I'll come with you. I need to get the eggs."
"Do you need to get the basket?"
"I'll use one of the buckets from the stables." Alice was relieved Paolo's temper had died down now. She was desperately sorry for him. She knew how much he loved working on the window and how much comfort he got from it. To have it sabotaged was outrageous, and it made it all the more frustrating that there wasn't a single thing either of them could do about it. Paolo pushed the door to the barn open and called out to his friend.
"Carlo! Carlo!"
He stopped mid-stride, said something in Italian, before quickly turning around to try to stop Alice from entering the barn. It was too late. She was already at his side. Alice let out a scream at the sight before her, before burying her face in Paolo's chest.
24th of June, 1945. Carissime Mamma e Sofia, I received your letter yesterday, and I am relieved to hear you are well. I still don't know when I will be repatriated, but I have been thinking very carefully about this. I have become very fond of Alice, who lives here at Telton Hall, the one who is expecting a baby very soon. She is in turmoil about whether to put it up for adoption or not. I think I know how to solve her dilemma, if she will listen to me, that is. I won't say any more until I have spoken to her, but as soon as I have news, I will let you know. I have to admit I will be glad to get away from this place. My dear friend and comrade Carlo met with a tragic death last week. I still cannot believe it's happened. He fell from the hayloft in the stable, or so they say. I must confess, I find it hard to accept this version of events. The police have not bothered looking into it properly. They don't care about another POW who has died. One less for them to worry about, as far as they are concerned. I know who is behind his death. I do not believe it was an accident. It just wouldn't happen that way. There are too many coincidences. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I am going to make sure there is justice for Carlo. Don't worry about me. I am not stupid and won't do anything rash. But I will not let the matter just be swept away. Until we see each other again, which I hope will be soon. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
This is the end of CD 8. The book continues on CD 9. CD 9. Chapter 34. Rhoda, 2022. It was a struggle to get out of bed the next morning. Rhoda had replaced the box in the living room and popped the key back in the vase. But even then, once she had gone to bed, her mind was wide awake, thinking about her brother and the crossroads she now found herself at. Could she really leave Dean behind? Even her relaxation app had been of little use, and eventually she had drifted off into a disturbed sleep. She woke several times from dreams of trying to reach Dean, but coming up against closed doors and obstacles constantly in her way. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she reached for her phone to check Facebook for any alerts. There was a message on Dean's missing page. Rhoda had long since stopped getting excited about these messages. They were usually just someone who wanted to share a memory of her brother privately, or who was in the same boat as her and looking for a loved one. She opened the message and read it. This one was neither. James Smith, I have information about your brother Dean. There was no profile picture, just the standard Facebook white silhouette graphic of an anonymous head and shoulders. Rhoda clicked on the profile. There was absolutely no personal information whatsoever. No friends, no photos, no posts, nothing. It was probably some crank. She'd had this a couple of times. Someone who thought it was funny to try to get her hopes up. A sick individual who enjoyed making more misery for someone else, preying on their fears. Despite this knowledge, Rhoda also knew she couldn't ignore it. Her earlier thoughts of not actively pursuing her brother were instantly dismissed. What if this was genuine and she deleted it? What if this was the one lead she had to finding Dean? She wouldn't be able to live without knowing. She sent a reply. Hello, can you give me some more information so I know this is genuine? Sorry, but I have to ask. Thanks. Rhoda Sullivan. Leaving her phone on the bedside table, she went for a shower. It was better than sitting there staring at her mobile, waiting for a reply which may or may not arrive. 20 minutes later, she was dressed and had dried her hair with a hairdryer Nate had bought from the shop. He was thoughtful like that, and she appreciated it. She wasn't used to being considered by anyone else, but it was quite nice, she had to admit. Rhoda picked up her phone. She had a reply already. I've spoken to him. We lodged at the same B&B. He said he had a sister called Rhodes. Rhoda's mouth dried instantly. Dean called her Rhodes sometimes. No one else did, just her brother. This James Smith wouldn't know that unless he'd spoken to Dean himself. Her hand shook as she typed the reply. I believe you. What can you tell me? She watched the 3 dots pulsate as her reply was read, and then they disappeared. He'd gone. No! Rhoda cried out loud. She closed the app and reopened it, in case it was some technical issue, but James Smith remained offline. She updated the message 3 times in the hope that his reply was drifting in cyberspace, waiting to hit her message box, but nothing appeared. She sat there for another frustrating 5 minutes before finally resigning herself to having to exercise patience. Maybe James Smith had to attend to something important, or had been interrupted, or was at work. There could be a multitude of reasons why he hadn't replied.
Rhoda pushed her phone into her back pocket and headed downstairs to grab a bite to eat. By the time she'd reached the kitchen, her phone had beeped through 2 text messages. One was from Nate, just saying good morning and that he'd be over at lunchtime after Isaac's swimming lesson. Rhoda sent a reply saying she was looking forward to seeing him. She didn't mention the little tingle of excitement that zipped through her at the prospect. The other message wasn't anywhere as exciting. It was from Vince Taylor.
Hello, dear. Can I come and see the window this morning? I am busy next week and cannot come over. Sorry to be a nuisance, but I'd love to see how you are getting on.
Rhoda couldn't think of a logical reason why not. It wasn't as if she had any plans that morning. Over the course of a few messages, they agreed he would call by at 9:30, about an hour later. It would give her a good distraction, she decided.
Good morning.
Jack came into the kitchen.
Did you sleep well?
Morning, said Rhoda. Yes, fine, thanks. Tea?
Silly question.
Jack winked at her and took his seat at the table. There you go.
Lovely. Looks a nice strong brew.
Rhoda sat down opposite him with her tea. Vince Taylor from the local historical society is coming over again this morning.
Is he?
Jack didn't sound very impressed by the idea. That's if you don't mind, said Rhoda quickly. Do you want me to see if I can cancel him?
Bit late now, I suppose.
Rhoda picked up her phone, feeling embarrassed that she'd assumed Jack would be all right with the visit. The number just rang out. He's not picking up. She tried a couple of more times without success. Sorry, Jack.
Don't worry about it now.
Rhoda took a sip of her tea, eyeing her host over the rim of the cup. She put the cup down. Jack, what is it about Vince Taylor you don't like? He seems pretty harmless to me, if I'm honest. He's just taken a keen interest in the chapel window, that's all. When he didn't answer, she continued. We get visitors like that all the time at the museum. It's lovely, really, to find like-minded people who are genuinely interested in the history and the craft. I think Vince is simply an enthusiast.
I need to get on,
said Jack abruptly, getting up from his chair.
Going to take Tink for a walk and pop over to see Aggie.
Wow, she'd really upset him today. Rhoda could kick herself for being so presumptuous. The chapel was a very sensitive subject for Jack, and she should have realised. An incoming text message from Nate instantly cheered her up.
Looking forward to seeing you too.
It really shouldn't be that big a deal, but there was that tingle of excitement again. Vince Taylor arrived at 9:30 on the dot in his 4x4. Rhoda watched from the living room window as he got out of the vehicle and went to make his way over to the door. But after a few strides, he returned to his car to fetch his walking stick. She gave her phone one last check for a message from James Smith before going out to greet Vince. She already had her jacket and boots on. If they went straight up to the chapel, rather than hanging around chatting, then he would be gone sooner, hopefully before Jack returned.
Lovely morning,
remarked Vince, as they made their way up the hill. When they reached the chapel, he stood looking out across the vista.
What a view! Shame to think all this is going to be smothered in houses in the not-too-distant future.
Yes, it really is a shame, agreed Rhoda, unlocking the chapel door.
How's the research going on the body?
Asked Vince, in a conspiratorial way.
Know who it is yet?
Rhoda wasn't sure she liked the patronising way he'd loaded the question, but she let it go. Not yet.
Who's been shortlisted as prime suspect?
No comment, said Rhoda, trying to make light of it. They walked into the chapel.
Very intriguing. You sound like quite the detective.
Vince gave a small laugh. I don't know about that. Rhoda's thoughts automatically went to Dean, and she found herself checking her phone while Vince took a closer look at the work she'd been doing that week. There was still no message from James Smith.
Is everything all right? Asked Vince. You seem a little preoccupied this morning.
I'm fine, Rhoda replied. smiling probably wider than necessary. She slipped her phone back in her pocket. Just waiting on a message from someone. Vince looked at the glass for a moment, before looking back at Rhoda.
This business with the body, do you think it's worth all the trouble you're going to? I mean, even if you find out who the body is, what good will that do?
Justice. That's what good it will do, said Rhoda, trying to keep the defensive tone from her voice. She was sick of having to explain this to people all the time. People can't get away with murder. Why should they? Why should this poor man have no justice? Why can't his family know he's been found, so their agony of not knowing can be stopped and they can put their loved one to rest?
But the murderer is probably dead themselves, or at least in their 90s, Vince pushed on. You'd take a 90-year-old to court for murder?
Yes, I would. There's no time limit on justice. Just because you're old, it doesn't make you less culpable.
You sound very determined.
That's because I am, retorted Rhoda. He nodded and turned his attention back to the glass.
This is amazing, to see the craftsmanship in this window up close. To think no one had touched this before now, only the POW. Have you been in contact with the Italian who made this?
I haven't been able to find out much about him, confessed Rhoda. The records were destroyed soon after they were all repatriated. She glanced over towards the shallow grave where the bones had been found. I've put an inquiry into the Italian Military Records Office, but I'm not holding out much luck.
Do you think he could be your mystery man?
It's possible. I've no firm evidence. Most of it is just notions in my head with no proof to back it up.
But you have a theory?
Not really. Rhoda needed to divert the conversation. So, this is the last of the smaller windows. I'm going to start on the main one next. She let Vince browse for a few more minutes. He was nice, but he wasn't in any hurry to leave, and Rhoda was aware Jack didn't really like him being there. Vince looked around the chapel, his gaze resting on the main window.
I don't suppose I could have a look up there, could I? Would you show me how you take it out of the walls?
Up there? On the scaffolding? Rhoda tried not to sound too surprised. It's not that easy to get up.
Oh, I'm more agile than you think.
Vince was walking towards the end of the chapel.
Just for a few minutes.
I don't know if you should. How was she going to dissuade him? The insurance doesn't cover you. I could get into trouble.
Nonsense. The world has gone crazy with insurance. All that health and safety nonsense.
Vince was at the foot of the scaffolding.
Come on, just a quick look.
Honestly, I'd rather we didn't. If Vince had hurt her, he'd decided to ignore her. Discarding his walking stick, which Rhoda was beginning to suspect was purely for aesthetic purposes, he began his ascent up the side of the scaffolding.
See, I'm quite capable,
he called, as he reached the first platform. Rhoda groaned and followed him up the tower. If she quickly showed him how the glass was held in, then the quicker they could get down again. To be fair, Vince was very capable of climbing to the top of the tower. Rhoda was surprised. You've done that before, she said, coming to stand next to him.
Once or twice. It's rather nice up here in the gods. Wouldn't want to fall.
He looked over the edge of the guardrail. Rhoda's stomach did a little somersault, not just at the glib comment, but also at the memory of the warning note she'd received. All of a sudden, it was a really bad idea being up here. We should get down.
But we haven't had a look at the fixings yet,
protested Vince. We shouldn't be up here. Rhoda went to turn, but felt Vince grab her elbow. His fingers dug into her flesh. She gave a small cry of pain and twisted around. What are you doing? Vince's gaze locked with hers. His lip curled as he went to speak, and his hand gripped her a little harder, pulling her nearer the edge. The sound of the door opening and Jack's voice calling out had Vince letting go and moving away. He grabbed the guardrail with both hands.
I'm so sorry. I got dizzy then.
We really need to get you down. Do you think you can manage it?
Hey! Shouted Jack. What on earth are you doing up there?
We're just coming down, called back Rhoda. Great, just what she needed. A witness to Vince's reckless act and her inability to stop him. They clambered down the scaffolding, and Rhoda was relieved once Vince's feet were firmly on the ground again.
Probably time you were on your way,
said Jack stiffly.
Yes, said Vince. Of course. Sorry to have taken up so much of your time.
It's fine, replied Rhoda. No problem. That wasn't strictly true, but it was the easiest thing to say. I'll walk you back. 10 minutes later, Vince Taylor was driving away from Telton Hall.
Good riddance to that, said Jack. Bloody dangerous going up that scaffolding. What did you think you were doing?
Sorry, I tried to stop him, but he was climbing up before I knew what was happening. I thought I'd better get up there with him, at least to make sure he was safe. Rhoda rubbed her face with her hand. Sorry, I shouldn't have agreed to him coming in the first place.
You can say that again.
Feeling fully chastised, Rhoda went back to the house and up to her room, making an excuse that she needed to make a few phone calls and check her emails. The truth was, she was embarrassed and didn't want to have to face Jack for a while. In the safety of her room, Rhoda lay down on her bed and closed her eyes. Her anxiety was having a field day. She hadn't felt this way for a long time. The anticipation of a reply from James Smith was making her heart race and her legs fidgety. Nervous energy was building up inside her, with no outlet. She sat up on the edge of the bed. This was no good. She'd have to get some fresh air and try to calm herself that way. Rhoda's phone pinged out an alert into the silent room, and her body flinched in response. She grabbed her phone. It was a message from James Smith. I have someone who wants to see you. Meet me at Telverton Viaduct. Be there at 12. Rhoda stared at the screen. Her stomach lurched, and she thought for a moment she was going to be sick. She read it again before springing into action. Where the hell was Telverton in relation to where she was now? Did she have enough time to get there? Someone wanted to see her. Could it be Dean? Oh, God, please let it be Dean. Please. Chapter 35. Alice, 1945. The sight of Carlo's body lying on the floor of the barn, his leg twisted back at an agonizing angle, his head to one side further than a neck should stretch, and his eyes wide open, staring up to the heavens, shook Alice to the core. She could not get the image out of her mind. It haunted her for days and days. In the aftermath of Carlo's death, Alice had been ordered to take bed rest by the midwife, whom Cook had called out. Mrs. Hartwell returned early from her visit to her sisters, and the local police descended on Telton Hall as they tried to work out the sequence of events. Paolo had been devastated by the death of his friend, and Alice longed to comfort him. But being confined to her bed, it wasn't possible. It was made worse by the knowledge that he was just above her in the attic room. At night, she stared up at the ceiling, hoping in some way Paolo would know she was thinking of him. She listened for movement on the floor above and tracked him as he got up in the mornings, dressed and went downstairs. That morning, he had paused on the landing near her bedroom, and she wondered if he was looking towards her door. It had been 4 days since the incident. Alice had seen no one except for Lily, Mrs. Hartwell, and the midwife. The latter was coming to see her again today, and Alice hoped to convince her that she was well enough to be allowed to leave her room. The Eggers had been on the phone every day, asking how she was. In the light of recent events, their visit had been postponed yet again. The further along she got in her pregnancy, the more upsetting the idea was that she would have to give up her baby. Around mid-morning, Alice heard the wheels of a vehicle pulling up on the driveway and the sound of 2 car doors slamming almost simultaneously. The bell rang, and shortly after, she could hear a deep voice talking to Cook.
It sounded like two men, and Alice assumed they were the police. When Mrs. Hartwell's voice could be heard, "Good morning, officer," this confirmed it. No doubt it was about Carlo. Alice hoped that they were here to arrest Billy. She had absolutely no proof of Billy's involvement whatsoever, but she felt sure he was responsible in some way. Carlo wouldn't have simply fallen from the hayloft. A short while after the policeman left, Lily appeared in the room. "Mrs. Hartwell said I was to come and see you," she said. "The police are treating Carlo's death as an accident." "What? That's so wrong." Now, Alice, don't go getting yourself all worked up, especially not with the midwife coming to see you today. She won't let you get up if your blood pressure is sky high." Alice gritted her teeth. Of course, Lily was right, but still the injustice was agonising. "I can't believe they're not even going to investigate it properly. Apparently they have. They've questioned everyone who was here. They gave Paolo a good grilling. Billy kept saying Paolo was the one who found Carlo. He was also the last person to see Carlo alive, and all that sort of stuff." "He's a bastard," snapped Alice. She didn't care she was swearing, and she certainly wasn't going to apologise for the fact. "Why didn't they question Billy properly? He was the one with a grudge against Carlo and Paolo. He's the one who's remotely strong enough to push Carlo from the hayloft." "Yes, but he's claiming he can't get up there with his dodgy leg." "I'm bloody sure he can." "Yes, so am I." Lily gave her a sympathetic look. "Anyway, the police said Carlo died from a broken neck, which was consistent with falling from a height. They are going to advise it to be treated as an accident." "What did Paolo say?" "He hasn't said much. How are you?" Alice knew Lily had become good friends with Carlo. Their relationship may have only been one of friendship, but she knew Lily would be upset. Lily shrugged. "I'm really sad. I liked Carlo a lot. Not in the way you like Paolo, but you know what I mean." "Of course I know what you mean. Come here." Alice put her arms around her friend and hugged her. She wished she could comfort Paolo in the same way. Lily sat back. "Do you really think Billy did it? Pushed Carlo?" "Look, I've had a lot of time to think about it," said Alice. "You know about the glass in the window being broken, the one Paolo was restoring?" "No? What's that?" "I must have forgotten in all the commotion about Carlo," said Alice, frowning. "When we got back from dropping Mrs. Hartwell at the station, Paolo went up to the chapel." Alice went on to explain how she'd intercepted Paolo in the kitchen garden. "And I'll tell you something else. I'm sure Aggie and Jack know more than they're letting on. They looked petrified when they came in the garden. Made up some flimsy excuse about where they'd been. I didn't believe them, but I was too busy calming Paolo down to ask them. I intended to speak to them later, but then all hell broke loose when me and Paolo found Carlo's body." She shivered as the image of Carlo lying on the stable floor came back to mind. "So what are you saying?" asked Lily. "That Billy killed Carlo by pushing him?" "Basically, yes. Maybe Carlo caught him up at the chapel, breaking the glass. Maybe they had a big argument and somehow Billy lured Carlo up to the loft and then pushed him. Or maybe they just got into a fight up there and it was an accident." "But you can't prove any of this." "No. But what if Jack and Aggie saw him up at the chapel and are now too scared to say anything?" "It doesn't prove anything, though," replied Lily. "I know what you're saying, and I agree. It sounds plausible, probable even, but without any proof. Even if the kids do say Billy was at the chapel, there are still no witnesses or proof that he pushed Carlo." "I'm going to speak to Aggie and Jack as soon as I'm allowed out of this bloody bed," said Alice, feeling the frustration building up inside her. "Where's the midwife? I wish she'd hurry up. As I said, don't go getting yourself all worked up. She'll be here soon. Look, I'd better go. See you later." Lily gave Alice a hug and then left the room. The midwife came and finally gave Alice the all clear to get up, as long as she was especially careful for a few days. Alice had duly promised, and as soon as the midwife left, she was up out of bed, getting dressed. She wanted to find Paolo. She knew he must be hurting after the loss of his friend, and that he would feel there had been a great injustice, as indeed she felt herself. All she wanted to do was to put her arms around him and offer him some sort of comfort, much the same as he had offered her over the past few weeks. Alice slipped out of the front door without being noticed and made her way around the side of the house, taking the long route, avoiding going through the kitchen garden so Cook didn't spot her. Just to be extra careful, she took the circuitous route up to the chapel to again be out of sight, but also it was less steep, if a little longer. Finally, she reached the chapel. The door gave a small groan of protest as she eased it open, the sound giving her presence away to Paolo, who had stopped work in anticipation of the visitor. His eyes grew wide, and for a fleeting moment there was happiness on his face.
Alice!
Then his expression clouded over.
What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in bed, resting.
The midwife came and said I could get up. Suddenly, Alice felt shy and apprehensive.
I wanted to see you.
There was a pensive silence as they looked at each other. Paolo placed his chisel on the workbench and approached her.
I have been very worried about you.
I've been worried about you too, said Alice.
I'm glad you came.
He held her hands at arm's length and surveyed her.
Are you sure you should be out of bed?
Positive. Alice couldn't help herself. She flung her arms around Paolo's neck and hugged him tightly.
I'm so sorry about Carlo, she whispered in his ear. So very sorry.
Paolo held on to Alice for a long time. She wasn't sure if he was crying, but if he needed to let out his emotions, then she wasn't going to stop him. Even men cried. She knew that, despite what they liked to have you believe. Eventually, Paolo composed himself, and they sat down in one of the pews.
I do not believe it was an accident, he said.
Neither do I, Alice reassured him.
I don't know how or why, but I am sure Billy is involved in some way.
They spent several minutes discussing the various theories. Both agreed that they suspected Carlo had witnessed Billy's sabotage of the window and confronted Billy, which had ended in some sort of ruck and Carlo's fall. Billy must have lured Carlo up to the loft somehow, said Alice.
Billy is strong, said Paolo. His leg might be damaged, but he has upper body strength. He could easily have got himself up there. Whether he meant to kill Carlo or not, I do not know. Maybe he just meant to injure him, but whatever, I do believe it was intentional.
It's just so awful.
It is. They buried Carlo yesterday. I attended the ceremony.
I'm so sorry, Paolo. I really am. The next few days passed gently by. Alice kept out of Billy's way as much as possible. She couldn't bear being in the same room as he was for more than a few minutes, and was glad no one questioned her when she used the excuse she was tired and needed to have a rest. Mrs. Hartwell was very understanding and insisted Alice didn't undertake any household duties for the time being. By the time Alice had been up and about for a week after getting the all clear from the midwife, Mrs. Hartwell was reassured enough to rebook her visit to her sister.
She's not been too well, and I would really like to see her, Mrs. Hartwell had explained. I won't be long, just 5 days like before. Now, you promise you will be careful, won't you, Alice? The Eggers are going to come and see you once I'm back. They've been very patient and, of course, concerned.
Alice smiled and promised she'd be extra vigilant, as well as making the right noises about looking forward to seeing the Eggers, when in actual fact it was the last thing she wanted to do. However, she didn't want to upset Mrs. Hartwell, not after the couple of weeks she'd had. Billy is driving me to the station today, Mrs. Hartwell continued. I think he needs something to do. He's been in an awfully bad mood recently. I think he's restless. He was talking about going to visit some of his old army chaps. It will probably do him some good. She let out a sigh. I still have hopes that he will meet a nice girl one day, and it will lift his spirits. But he's got to stop going around so bad-tempered to get a girl in the first place. She tutted and gave a shake of her head. Alice hoped that no woman would willingly get involved with Billy. He was rotten to the core, and it would be a crying shame if some innocent girl got saddled with him. Once Mrs. Hartwell was on her way, Alice quickly prepared the vegetables for dinner. Cook was unwell and had had to take the day off. It was most unusual for Cook to be ill, and just bad luck it happened to be when Mrs. Hartwell was going away. Alice and Lily had reassured Mrs. Hartwell they could easily manage a couple of days, and they were more than capable of looking after Jack. Besides, Aggie's mother was just over the road at the cottage should they need anything. Alice really didn't want Mrs. Hartwell to miss out on the opportunity to visit her sister for a second time. Somewhat reluctantly, but also gratefully, Mrs. Hartwell had agreed. "Right, that's that done," said Alice, popping the lid on the saucepan of peeled potatoes. "I'm going to nip up and see Paolo before Billy gets back." "Good idea," said Lily. "Mind how you go." Paolo greeted her warmly when she arrived at the chapel.
"I have missed you very much,"
he said, echoing her own thoughts. Alice was pleased he sounded more upbeat. He was still grieving for Carlo, but each day she noticed the chink of light in his eyes grow bigger. "How are you getting on with the window?" she asked, walking around the workbench to admire his craftsmanship. "This is so beautiful, Paolo. I wish I could see more of your work." He came to stand beside her.
"Maybe you can, one day."
"Oh, I'd love that." Paolo rested his arm around her shoulder and went to say something, but before he could speak, the door to the chapel burst open, and in raced Lily with Aggie and Jack. Instantly, Alice was on high alert. "What's the matter?" "It's Billy," said Lily. The pupils of her eyes were dilated, and Alice could see her body shaking. "He's come back in a terrible temper. He's after Jack. I've brought him up here to hide him. I didn't know what else to do."
"Why is he after Jack?"
asked Paolo. Alice was about to ask the same question, but all of a sudden she had a moment of clarity. She knew why. Chapter 36. Nate, 2022. Nate was sitting poolside, sweating from the humidity in the leisure centre, despite already stripping off his jumper. The cacophony of noise echoing around the building was at just the pitch that was torture to his ears. Still, Isaac was doing well, and every time he completed a length of the pool, he looked to check Nate had seen and was suitably impressed. Nate's mobile phone vibrated in his pocket. It could only be Siobhan or Rhoda. They were the only ones he'd passed on his temporary number to. He'd ordered a new phone, which would be available to pick up on Monday. Until then, he had one of Isaac's old phones, which his own SIM card didn't fit. It was Siobhan's number.
"Hi."
He was surprised to hear Harrison speak.
"It's me, Harrison,"
he said needlessly.
"Sorry to bother you, Nate. I can hear you're at the pool, but I wanted to check you got my message yesterday. Siobhan said your phone's broken or something." "Yeah, managed to get it run over."
Nate had a vague recollection of his phone ringing just as he was diving out of the way of the car. He hadn't told Siobhan about the car park incident. He didn't want to worry her, or for her to start thinking Isaac wasn't safe with him. Nate would be the judge of that.
"I didn't get your voicemail, if that's what you're asking." "No, it's about that Vince Taylor you asked me to check out."
"Okay," said Nate, warily. He held his hand over his other ear to block out the noise of the swimming club.
"This is entirely off the record, and I'm only doing it, well, you know, out of guilt."
Nate couldn't help himself, and then regretted it as soon as the words were out of his mouth.
"Old time's sake." "Yeah, something like that. So, off the record, what did you find out?"
Nate gave Isaac a thumbs up at his dive into the water and replaced his hand over his ear.
"Vincent Taylor is a retired secondary school teacher, lives in Bristol, married, 2 children, no criminal record, not known to the police in any way, just a normal bloke."
"Is that it?
Is that what, after nearly 20 years in the police force, your detective skills amount to?
Nate was relieved on the one hand, but on the other, he was still uncertain. He needed more convincing.
There's nothing else to say. Okay, thanks.
Nate ended the call and flopped back in the plastic seat, dropping his phone into the duffel bag at his feet. 20 minutes later, Nate was in the car with Isaac, heading towards Telton, when he heard the faint sound of a phone ringing.
Is that your new phone?
Asked Isaac, as he scoffed a packet of crisps.
Oh, God, yes. I'm still not used to the ringtone. It's in that bag on the back seat. Reach around and get it, can you, mate?
Isaac didn't exactly rush, and by the time he'd got the bag and located the phone, it had stopped ringing. Nate hadn't set up voicemail on it yet. A message bleeped in.
It's from Rhoda. Do you want me to read it? Asked Isaac, holding the phone flat in the palm of his hand. Yes, please. Sorry, tried to call. Got a lead on Dean. Am going to the viaduct at Telverton.
Wow, a lead on Dean. Nate was surprised. Of course, it was good, but it was out of the blue and odd that she should be going to the viaduct. He presumed Rhoda didn't know about the viaduct, so he could only assume whoever she was meeting had suggested it. The idea was unsettling.
What does she mean she has a lead on Dean? Asked Isaac. He's not a dog.
Nate smiled at his son.
It's an expression. She doesn't mean a dog lead, but a clue that will lead her to something. She's trying to find her brother.
Nate wanted to keep things simple for Isaac, so he had a chance to process the basics before adding extra information.
Is he still lost? Asked Isaac. Rhoda doesn't know where he is, replied Nate, stopping at a set of lights. But someone else might. I thought she was seeing Vince Taylor this morning. Vince Taylor? He's the old man from the history club.
Isaac peered inside his crisp packet and gave it a small shake.
Taylor, Taylor, an occupational surname from the French word tailleur, meaning cutter. Lots of surnames came from the occupation someone did. I thought he was Italian.
Isaac tipped the crisp packet up to his mouth to catch the crumbs.
Not with a name like Taylor, said Nate.
Isaac wiped his mouth on the cuff of his sleeve, which earned him a disapproving look from Nate.
There's a photograph of him standing by the Leaning Tower of Pisa with a woman, Isaac carried on. Probably went there on holiday. It's a famous tourist attraction. Where did you see this photograph anyway? On his website. It's in the background of his welcome page. He's sitting at his desk and it's behind him. Rhoda had it open on her laptop. She said I could look. It's not a very good website, just got one page. Doesn't show anything to do with history stuff.
Isaac tapped at the screen of his phone and held it up to show Nate, and then zoomed in on the photograph.
There, but he must live in Somerset now. Here's another one of him. He's standing on the viaduct. Is that the one Rhoda has gone to?
Nate glanced over at the phone screen and caught a glimpse of the photo Isaac was showing him, before turning his attention back to the road. Telverton Viaduct was well known for its historical railway line. It wasn't that unusual that a local historian would have his photo taken standing underneath it. They travelled on for a few minutes in silence. Nate's mind was whirring. He was missing something important, but he didn't know what. His conversation with Isaac was setting his nerves inexplicably on edge. What was he missing? And then it dawned on him. Nate hit the brakes, sending Isaac lurching forward, the seatbelt stopping him crashing into the dashboard.
Dad! Sorry, mate. Let me see that webpage again.
Isaac found it on his phone and passed it over. Nate studied it closely, zooming in on both images.
Shit.
Nate grabbed his own phone and punched at the keys. He could hear it ringing at the other end.
Come on, pick up.
Nate, you okay? Came Siobhan's voice.
I need to speak to Harrison. It's urgent.
Now? We're just about to go out for lunch.
Yes, now, please.
Okay. A few seconds later, Harrison was on the phone.
What's up?
That Vince Taylor.
How old is he? Nate didn't bother to hide his impatience. Not sure. Let me have a look. Nate waited an agonizing minute while Harrison located the information he'd found out on Taylor. Right. Date of birth, 3rd of September 1945. What about his parents? Who were they? For God's sake, Nate, I'm CID, not MI5. How the hell would I know that? Can you find out? Probably, but it won't be today. Has he ever been known by any other name? Pushed Nate, his fingers drumming wildly on the top of the steering wheel. Again, I don't know without digging deeper. What's going on? Is Vincent his full name? Bloody hell, Nate, what is this? Can you look? Hang on. The sound of the keys clicking on the keyboard filled the next few seconds before Harrison spoke. His full name is Vincent Thomas Taylor. Are you in some kind of trouble, Nate? No, not me. Thanks. Nate hung up. He turned to his son. Google the meaning of the surname Sartori. Isaac peered at his phone and typed in the Italian surname. Nate tried not to lean over and exercised patience like he'd never done before. Finally, Isaac had a result. That's funny. It means Taylor, like Mr. Taylor, but spelled Tailor. Bother, Nate said, correcting himself quickly. He immediately called Rhoda's number, but it went to voicemail. Rhoda, it's me, Nate. Don't go to the viaduct. Something funny's going on. I need to speak to you first. Taylor hasn't been honest with us. He's something to do with the body in the chapel, I'm sure. He knows the viaduct. It's all connected somehow. I need to work it out, but I don't want you going there. Call me as soon as you get this. He was aware it was a rather convoluted and confusing message. His mind was frantically trying to put all the pieces together, but he needed to know Rhoda was safe before he could think about it properly. All he knew was his gut was telling him she was in danger. Chapter 37. Alice, 1945. We've got to hide Jack, Alice said, rushing over to the little lad. What about you, Aggie? Are you safe? Aggie hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between the adults. Alice was keen to reassure her. It's all right, I know, or at least I can guess. Tell me, Aggie, does Billy know you know? What are you talking about? It was Lily's turn to be confused. Another tense moment passed before Aggie finally spoke. He might guess. Her bottom lip trembled ever so slightly. Can someone please tell me what's going on? Insisted Lily. Jack and Aggie know how Carlo fell, said Alice, her gaze fixed on Aggie. I'm right, aren't I? The 12-year-old nodded her head, taking hold of Jack's hand at the same time. We were hiding in the barn. We'd taken some apples from the store. We were hungry, but we knew we wouldn't be allowed to eat anything. Not with rationing still in place and all that. Cook wouldn't let us. It's all right. You don't have to explain, said Alice reassuringly. What did you see happen in the barn? Aggie scuffed at the floor with her shoe. Billy told Carlo there was a dead rat in the hayloft. Said Carlo was to go up there and get it. Then what? Prompted Alice, when Aggie ground to a halt. Carlo couldn't find it. Did he see you? Aggie nodded. He looked at us and saw us with the apples. He put his finger to his lips and pushed some straw over us. So Billy wouldn't know you were there, said Lily. Dear Carlo, he was such a kind man. Alice squeezed Lily's hand. She gave Aggie a small, encouraging smile. What happened after that? Carlo said there weren't any rats. Billy told him he was blind and climbed up the ladder. We stayed where we were. We were too scared to move. Next thing, Billy was saying how sick he was of the eye ties being there. Carlo told Billy he was a bitter man who couldn't accept he was discharged from the army. Carlo said he knew it was Billy who broke Paolo's stained glass. Aggie glanced over at Paolo's workbench. Next thing, they were fighting. Billy grabbed Carlo in a headlock. Carlo couldn't move. Billy was too strong. He twisted Carlo's head. Aggie's voice broke. Jack took up the story.
There was a big crack, like a stick being broken. Carlo went all limp, like a dead rabbit, and Billy threw him down from the loft.
Alice and Lily both gasped, and Paolo muttered something which Alice assumed was a curse in his native tongue.
He broke Carlo's neck before he fell.
Paolo gave a roar and thumped his hand hard on the workbench, narrowly missing the glass.
And how does Billy know you saw this?
Asked Alice.
I don't know,
said Aggie.
We stayed hidden. When he left, we climbed out of the back window of the barn and slid down the pulley rope. We ran around the barn and made it look like we were coming from the chapel. Billy was standing outside smoking. He stopped us and pulled a strand of straw from Jack's hair and asked where Jack had been.
What did you say? Asked Lily, wiping a tear from her face.
We just said it was from earlier, explained Aggie. Did he believe you?
Lily blinked more tears away.
He just looked at us for a long time before telling us to clear off, replied Aggie. We came through the gate, and that's when we saw Alice.
Have you told anyone else? Asked Alice. Did you say anything to your mother? She directed the question at Jack.
No,
said Jack.
But I keep having bad dreams. She said I was talking in my sleep about Carlo being pushed. She said I was saying a lot last night. I can't help it. I don't know what I say when I'm asleep.
It's all right, said Alice. You're not in trouble. It's not your fault. I wonder if your mother mentioned it to Billy this morning, and that's why he's come back in a rage. The door flew open, making everyone jump and turn. Billy stepped into the chapel, his beady, rat-like eyes taking in the scene before him. Alice automatically pulled Jack and Aggie behind her, while Lily stood next to her, and Paolo moved in front of them.
Well, well, well. Look what we have here, mused Billy, a smirk on his face. Looks like a mother's meeting. Might have known Paolo would be gossiping with the women and children.
He moved into the building, pushing the door closed with his walking stick.
So, has my dear little stepbrother been telling tales out of school, or is it his cocky cousin?
Jack flinched at the words, and Alice squeezed his hand.
Leave the kids alone,
she said, trying to sound braver than she felt.
Or you'll do what?
Billy was clearly in his element.
You'll get your cowardly friend here to protect you. I wouldn't count on him being any use. He'll end up like his mate.
Alice managed to grab Paolo before he'd had time to translate what Billy was saying.
Don't, Paolo. He's baiting you. He wants you to get angry.
Paolo shrugged off her arm and planted his feet firmly on the ground, his legs astride. He fixed his gaze on Billy.
I am not scared of you. You should be, mate, said Billy.
Anyway, I'm saving you for another day. In the meantime, I need to speak to Jack and Aggie. Come on, you two. Back to the house now.
You stay where you are, Lily ordered to the children.
Oh dear, girls, please don't be tiresome, sighed Billy.
He moved closer to them.
Leave them alone,
said Paolo. His voice was firm and strong, unlike Alice had ever heard before. He may have been smaller in stature than Billy, but he was stronger, she was sure. She'd felt his hard biceps and firm chest. Alice had no doubt Paolo would win if it came to a fight. Sadly, though, he would win only the battle and not the war. Billy would make him pay in other ways. He'd have Paolo transferred back to the POW camp in a flash.
Get out of my way,
snarled Billy. Paolo stepped in front of Billy and pushed him backwards. It caught the Englishman off balance, and he staggered back a few paces, only saved by his stick to keep him upright.
You idiot!
Billy was breathing hard, and from his pocket, he pulled out a pistol. Alice had seen the weapon before, when Billy had been cleaning it one evening in front of the fire. It was his service pistol. He'd never handed it back in, and somehow it had slipped through the net. What she didn't know was whether it was loaded.
Don't do anything stupid now, Billy, warned Alice. Put the gun away.
I don't think you're in any position to tell me what to do.
Billy waved the gun at her.
Now, be a good girl and stand back.
Before Alice realised what was happening, Paolo had launched himself at Billy, grabbing the muzzle of the gun and grappling for control. Chaos ensued, and then, all of a sudden, the gun went off. Alice didn't know who had screamed the loudest, but they dived for cover among the pews. Fortunately, the bullet implanted itself in the chapel wall. The two men struggled with each other as they tried to gain control of the gun. Every now and then, Alice had to duck behind the pew when the pistol was waved in their direction. She poked her head back up over the wooden bench. From behind Billy, she could see Jack. He must have sneaked around when she wasn't watching him. Alice jumped to her feet. "Jack!" If he'd heard her, he ignored her. It was then that she realised he was brandishing a solid brass candlestick that usually sat at the side of the church, near the baptism font. It was at least a foot long, and Jack was holding it in the air behind his shoulder. Paolo and Billy were bent double in a tangle of limbs as they wrestled for the gun. "Jack!" Alice yelled at him again. "Stop!" It was too late. There was a sickening thud as the candlestick came into contact with bone, and the men collapsed in a heap. The gun went flying across the flagstones. There was a second or two of silence before Alice sprang into action, rushing out from the pew to grab the pistol. She picked it up, her hands shaking wildly as she tried to keep her aim steady towards the men on the ground. There was a groan, she didn't know who from, followed by another. Paolo rolled onto his back and got to his feet. Then Billy, swearing like mad, pushed himself onto his hands and knees, swaying slightly. He put his hand to his head, and when he took it away, his fingers were red with blood.
"You stupid fucking kid," he mumbled. "Alice, give me the gun,"
said Paolo steadily.
Alice shook her head. "No. Please, Alice, just give him the gun," pleaded Lily. "I can't. If he has the gun, then he will be charged with attempted murder or trying to escape, or something like that." She didn't take her eyes off Billy, who was now pulling on his stick to get to his feet. It took a moment for him to focus properly.
"Alice, what are you doing with that gun? Give it to me."
"No!"
She gripped it with both hands to keep her aim steady.
"Stay away!"
Alice had no idea how she was going to get out of this. All she knew was that she had to protect everyone in the chapel, including Paolo, despite what he thought. Her head felt fuzzy, her legs were jiggling with fear, and she wasn't sure how much longer she'd be able to stay on her feet.
"You have to give me the gun," said Paolo.
"I can end this."
Alice looked at him.
"I won't let you do that."
Tears blurred her eyes. Without warning, Billy launched himself at her. Paolo reacted instantly, with Lily just a split second behind as they all tried to grab the gun. It was a complete blur. Alice could hear everyone shouting.
"Give it to me."
"Let go! Get back!"
She didn't know who was shouting what. The words were reverberating around the chapel, bouncing off the walls, clashing and clattering like crockery being smashed. Bang! Immediately after the gun discharged, there was silence. The huddle of Alice, Paolo, Lily, Billy, and somehow Aggie had got herself in the ruck, all stopped still, looking at one another in shock. Alice looked from one shocked and ashen face to the other, each covered with blood. Her gaze travelled to Billy, to Paolo, and then back to Billy again. They all stepped back, in an unconscious, synchronised movement. The gun dropped from the group of hands. Blood spurted from Billy's throat. His hand instinctively went to his neck to try to stem the bleeding, but it was futile. Within seconds, it was streaming out between his fingers. He dropped to his knees. He swayed. His eyes were glazed and unfocused. Then he keeled over. He was dead before his face hit the stone floor. Alice grabbed the edge of the pew as her body reacted to the sight of the dead body in front of her. Lily grabbed her arm and made her sit down.
"Is he dead?"
came the small voice of Aggie.
Yes, he's dead, said Lily. Don't look. Come and sit over here. You too, Jack.
Alice fought to calm her breathing. She needed to think, needed to work out what they must do now. She looked across at Paolo. He had sunk to the ground and was leaning back against the end of the pew on the opposite aisle, his arms folded over his drawn knees and his head bowed.
Are you all right, Paolo?
She asked. It took a moment, but then he looked up at her and gave a swift nod.
Are you?
I think so.
Is everyone all right?
Paolo got to his feet and dragged a hand down his face as he surveyed the dead body in front of him.
What are we going to do? Ventured Lily.
We have to tell the police, said Paolo. We need to explain exactly what happened. Alice jumped to her feet.
No.
She went over to Paolo. We're not calling the police.
What?
Lily shifted closer to Aggie and put her arm around the girl.
We've got to. We can't just leave him here.
Alice clasped her hands together, raising them to her mouth as if in prayer.
If we call the police, they will want to know who killed Billy.
Naturally, said Lily, albeit unnecessarily. Alice continued.
Well, who did kill Billy?
She purposely avoided looking at the dead man. She needed to keep a clear head, and watching the blood pool around his body wasn't helping.
Which one of us killed him? I had hold of the gun, said Lily.
So did I, said Paolo.
And I did as well, said Alice. Not to mention Aggie. So which one of us pulled the trigger?
The question hung in the air.
I don't know,
said Lily at last.
Exactly, said Alice. It could even have been Billy himself. And what if Jack hitting him on the head was enough to kill him? You don't always die straight away from a head injury. I don't know about you, but I saw blood trickle from his nose. He could have been bleeding on the brain. Oh, don't say that. Lily bit her lip. Jack couldn't have killed him.
Alice is right, said Paolo at last. Any one of us could be responsible for his death. So what we do now is very important. He took a deep breath. We call the police. I will confess to killing Billy. I alone struggled with him. That way, none of you will be suspected. They will accept it was me, a prisoner. Of course, I cannot be trusted. I am a killer.
No!
Alice didn't mean to shout as loud as she did, and her voice echoed around the chapel.
No, I won't let you do that. If you confess, then I will confess too. They won't believe you. Like you said, you're not to be trusted. They will believe an English girl over an Italian POW.
She didn't mean to hurt his feelings by being so blunt, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. There was no way she was going to let Paolo take the blame.
What are we going to do then? Asked Lily. We can't all confess to killing him. They will ultimately make their own minds up, and I'm sure they will be happy for Paolo to take the blame. And what about Mrs. Hartwell? I know Billy wasn't her son, but she won't want to see her anymore. We'll be homeless, and you in your condition as well. She won't be able to let us stay.
Lily was on her feet as the panic set in. I know exactly what we're going to do, said Alice. Now, listen to me, everyone. This is the end of CD 9. The book continues on CD 10.